This girl doesn't know she's the daughter of a wealthy family. She's been interning for her parents for the past 2 years. The employees bully her into carrying water, serving tea, and even rummaging through trash. Despite it all, she stays upbeat. Nevertheless, she remains optimistic and enjoys life. The reason she does this is that in 2 days, she'll become a full-time employee. The girl, named Jian, was born into a wealthy family, but due to a mistake by her mother 20 years ago, she was lost. That day, her grandmother took her shopping, but when she got out, she found her sleeping soundly in the back, so she let her sleep a little longer and closed the car door. After leaving the car, not long after, a woman passing by noticed the expensive hairpin on her head and became greedy. She looked around and, seeing no one, reached out and opened the car door, intending to take the hairpin. But to her surprise, she couldn't get the hairpin off. Jian woke up, startled, as the woman swiftly took her away. Returning with the hairpin, she found her mother driving towards them. She panicked, thinking she was about to be caught, but the car drove past them without any intention of stopping. Only then did she dare to breathe a sigh of relief, and until now, her mother hadn't noticed her daughter was missing. When she looked back, she realized her daughter was nowhere to be found. Panicked, she turned to find her daughter, but then a truck rushed towards them, causing the car to spin out of control and her mother to faint from hitting her head on the glass. When she woke up, a month had passed. Then, relying on her financial influence, she offered a reward of 6 billion won to anyone who found her daughter. Human interest news was broadcast continuously on TV for many hours, but her daughter was still missing. 20 years later, the mother couldn't believe her daughter was working at the family company. Moreover, she was often bullied and even given wrong tasks by the director, so she had to take his daughter to study. After dropping off the director's daughter, she finally had time to hang out with her friends. In the director's office, she got a call to hurry to the hospital for his wife's father. Jian, on the brink of full-time employment, had to accept silently. She drove to the director's house. The director kept urging her on the phone, causing her to accelerate, but unfortunately, an accident occurred. Her car hit the rear of another man's car. With it being the director's car, she hesitated to involve the insurance company, thus she compensated from her own funds. But the man wanted 30 million won in compensation. Jian was immediately frozen. As an intern like her, where could she get such a large sum of money? The man, seeing her pitiful, allowed her to compensate within her financial means. They agreed to settle the compensation the next day. But Jian didn't know that this man was the son of the company president where she was interning. The man's name is Du Kyung, the heir of the ATS conglomerate. After Jian arrived, the director's wife scolded her and ordered her to move to the front seat of the car. As she watched the car drive away, she looked up at the star-filled sky. She blamed the heavens for treating her so poorly. The affluent family received a condition. When the lady opened it, she found 2 toothbrushes inside a letter. The letter asked her to undergo DNA testing. One of the toothbrushes belonged to her daughter who had been missing for 25 years. She thought it was another scam, so she threw the box to the ground. At this point, a strange phone sent pictures. She opened it to find her daughter's hairpin from that year along with a photo of the 2 girls. She looked at the photo excitedly, realizing that the person in the photo was Jian and Goo. She hurriedly searched for the hairpin to match the photo, finally confirming that it was the missing hairpin of her daughter. Seeing her long-lost daughter, she was so excited that she fainted. Meanwhile, Jian is trying her best, but ultimately ends up disappointed. Only one person is chosen to be a full-time employee in the marketing department. Even after all the interns in the department put in effort, they still lost to a person with a lost connection. And that person is Jian's high school friend named Ha-young. Even yesterday, they met at a gathering. Jian angrily confronts the other. "Why didn't you tell me at the gathering?" Ha-young casually says she wanted to see Jian's defeated appearance. Jian turns off Haran's phone and asks why she's so desperate. She'll kill Ha-young and then kill herself. The 2 women quickly rush to fight, attracting the attention of everyone around. This scene is also seen by Du Kyung. He fails to recognize the girl across the street as the one who crashed into his car last night. Jian suddenly slams her head into Ha-young's face. Witnessing this, Du Kyung's eyes widen in astonishment. In no time, they were taken to the police station, where Ha-young demanded to file a lawsuit furiously. Jian calmly threatened revenge, then accused her of being the type to exploit relationships to steal a friend's job. Seeing the intention to accuse her, Ha-young immediately changed her tune. In the end, Ha-young's father appeared to resolve the matter. After they left, Ha-young's father didn't forget to say one thing to her. This is reality, she realized, understanding she couldn't compete with connections no matter how hard she tried. Although not countersued, she was still fired by the company. When she returned home, Jian didn't want her family to worry, so she wore a mask to hide her cold wounds. While informing her family that she didn't get the job, Jisoo couldn't believe it was as simple as that. She snuck into her sister's room and swiftly pulled down the mask unnoticed. Despite being frustrated, Jian still couldn't speak out and silently endured. The next day, Do-kyung contacted Jian demanding 5 million won in compensation but couldn't reach her. So he sent a voice message unexpectedly heard by Jisoo. "Hey, culprit, do you think you can hide somewhere in Korea? If you think you can escape, you're wrong. If you don't bring 5 million won by tomorrow night, you'll have big trouble." Jisoo thought this was a thug threatening her, so she decided not to tell Jian for the time being, preparing to handle this thug alone and then send the meeting place to the other party. When Do-kyung arrived at the meeting place and saw no one, Jian thought she had been played. As he took out his phone to call, Jisoo suddenly jumped out, angry, and filmed him. Do-kyung snatched her phone and interrogated her why she was filming him. Jisoo said she would report him for threatening others because her sister didn't have a car, so how could she run into him? Do-kyung overheard, realizing they were sisters. After explaining, Jisoo realized her sister had caused trouble, repeatedly apologizing. On the other side, the lady received the DNA test results. One of these two people is definitely her daughter who disappeared 25 years ago, and the lady is Do-kyung's birth mother. At this point, there were some strange calls. The other party claimed that the package was sent by them, demanding 1 billion won to reveal the information about her daughter. And this couple is the man who abducted her daughter. The lady angrily said that as long as her daughter is found, she will reward 2 billion won. The woman was overjoyed upon hearing this. They arranged to meet an hour later. But they didn't expect that the lady would bring a group of thugs to the meeting spot. They were quickly outnumbered. From their mouths, the lady found out the address of her daughter. Shortly after, she went to Jian's house. Without beating around the bush, she directly asked Jian's mother which of the two girls was her daughter. Jian's mother, taken aback, said both girls were her daughters. They were fraternal twins. After a heated debate, the lady took out the DNA test results, stating that one of the two was her lost daughter. At this point, Jian's mother couldn't hide anymore and had to admit that Jian was her daughter. Jian? This was the most indifferent mother Ad had ever met. When shopping, she only chose things for herself, paying no attention when one of the two babies ran out onto the street. When the mother heard the collision, she turned back only to see her daughter gone forever. After losing her daughter, she blamed herself immensely. On her way back from her daughter's funeral, she found a girl sitting and crying loudly. Seeing the child of the same age as daughter, she decided to take her to the care facility without realizing she was from a wealthy family. 25 years later, the mother and Rich, through various sources, found her way to the doorstep. After a fiery argument, Jian's mother finally admitted that Jian was her daughter. After learning that Jian was her daughter, the lady urged Jian's mother to quickly tell her the truth. In a few days, she would welcome her home. Based on the address provided by Ian, the lady found the fried chicken shop where Jian worked. Seeing her daughter working hard and being scolded by her boss made her, as a mother, feel extremely distressed, so she went to meet the shop owner. Then she handed over a sum of money, asking him to change Jian's job and give her this money. The boss reluctantly agreed, informing her that his grandson needed a job, so he had to let Jian go and gave her a week's salary. Jian counted the money and gave the boss the excess. The greedy boss pocketed the excess money. After receiving her salary, Jian rushed to the convenience store to buy a rice ball and the cheapest bottle of water. Her friend called her at that moment. During the conversation, they mentioned money, reminding Jian of the accident with the car insurance. She still hadn't paid the 5 million won compensation. Panic-stricken, Jian said she was busy and hung up. Then she called Do-kyung. On the other end, Do-kyung told her to come quickly to pay for the car repair. Jian apologized, saying she had just lost her job, so she didn't have much money. Suddenly, Do-kyung asked if she knew Japanese or English. After getting an affirmative answer, he immediately told her to dress neatly and quickly come over, promising to pay her the highest salary. It turned out the interpreter for the international rich party he organized had suddenly had an accident. Jian hastily ran home to change clothes. At this moment, her mother wanted to talk about her identity, but all Jian could think about was the other salary, completely ignoring her mother's words. After changing into dusty clothes and shoes, she rushed out of the house, and shortly after, she arrived at the party. In the evening, when the activities began, Jian flawlessly translated English and Japanese from the stands. Under her guidance, the performance went smoothly. Do-kyung looked at her with satisfaction, and even the guests below nodded in praise. The event proceeded very smoothly, and suddenly Do-kyung received a phone call. His sister Seo-hyun announced that she had found his lost sister after 25 years, but their parents were arguing about it, so he was asked to come home quickly. Do-kyung asked a few questions of his friends and then left. As the event concluded, Jian waited alone for Do-kyung to join her for dinner, but he hadn't arrived yet. As everyone cleared out, there was still no sign of Do-kyung anywhere. She tried calling, but no one answered. Jian began to feel uneasy. Before getting here to catch the bus on time, she had spent all the money in her pocket, so she had to walk home. Misfortune continued to strike, so Jian hurried to the bus station. Then, a man in a raincoat walked by and started talking to her. Jian was extremely frightened because this man looked nothing like a good person. "No need, my husband is coming to pick me up soon." After hearing this, the man got back on his bike and left. After he walked away, Jian felt scared. She urgently messaged a friend for money and called a taxi, but the dispatcher informed her that there were no taxis available. She feared she would encounter the same man again. She decided to walk home in the rain. At this point, the man unexpectedly turned back. As he passed by, he pedaled forward and then stopped. Jian saw him and felt scared, stepping back. He seemed to pull something out. It turned out to be Jian scaring herself. Then he rode off. Then she quickly called the man, who was also Grad's younger brother and her university friend, telling him about her situation. Sun Woo-hyuk hastily put aside his work to find her. On the other side, after resolving the family matter, Do-kyung finally saw Jian's message. He quickly drove to pick her up, but Sun Woo-hyuk had also arrived to pick her up. Coincidentally, when he arrived, he saw this and assumed Jian's boyfriend had come for her, so he stayed in the car. Exhausted, Jian went home and fell into a deep sleep until 11 a.m. Jian's mother entered, woke her, and handed her a new outfit, telling her to put on makeup and dress neatly. Still dazed, Jian didn't grasp what was happening. Following her mother to a restaurant, Jian initially assumed it was for sightseeing, but her mother hinted they would find out upon arrival. Arriving at the restaurant, they were escorted to a VIP room by the manager. Jian, surprised, asked her mother who the two people were. Mrs. Jian simply said they were her friends, but Jian had no idea that the person sitting in front of her was her biological mother. She was also the lady of the house and the chairman of the ATS group. After greeting them, Jian sat down with her mother. At this point, the chairman called for a delicious dish. Jian thought her mother was introducing her to a job. The chairman gently asked her to taste the food while it was still hot. Jian nodded in amazement and then took a big bite. Mrs. Jian couldn't help but shed tears at her hearty eating, moved by her hunger. The chairman then asked the manager to bring up more dishes from the restaurant. Jian, who hadn't eaten all day, immersed herself in the food. "I'm not picky about food. I'm not picky, the food here is delicious, or maybe it's because I haven't eaten since yesterday." Mrs. Jian, upon hearing Jian say she hadn't eaten anything all day, looked unhappy and turned to Mrs. Jian. Mrs. Jian explained that her daughter had never been picky about food and listed many of her virtues. Jian heard her mother praising her, and just as she was about to speak, Mrs. Jian interrupted, saying she should eat slowly. After drinking a gulp of water, Jian remembered seeing the couple on a magazine during her internship at the ATS company. They were the husband and wife of the ATS company's chairman. Jian looked at the two people in amazement and quietly asked her mother how she knew these people. Mrs. Jian replied that it was thanks to her. Jian was bewildered. In fact, they were her biological parents. They hoped she would recognize them, but Jian thought she had misheard her mother, so her mother repeated it, and then Jian looked at them in disbelief. Her mother told her to live in harmony with her biological parents. After saying that, she turned and left. Jian, seeing her mother leaving, grabbed her bag and followed her. At this point, the chairman suddenly called her back. "Stay here." Jian bowed her head in apology and hurriedly left. After returning home, the couple recounted this to Do-kyung and their daughter. Do-kyung said he would help convince their younger daughter to come back home. In the evening, Jian waited at the gate. When Mrs. Jian saw her daughter dressed so revealingly, she immediately scolded her. "Am I attractive?" Mrs. Jian's anger immediately subsided. Jian told her mother that even if she were a princess, she would never leave this house. But Mrs. Jian urged her to quickly return to her own home so she could fulfill her dream of studying abroad that she had always desired. Jian happily stated that between studying abroad and family, she would choose family. She snuggled against her mother, expressing her desire to stay close. Returning home, Jian glanced at the relatives she'd lived with for 25 years, deciding to forsake her affluent lifestyle. She then informed her mother of her decision. The next day, she started working as a service staff member and encountered various challenges. While helping load items into a car, they were blocked by another vehicle. She advised the driver to move back a bit, but they claimed not to know how to drive. Jian had to maneuver through a narrow space. Suddenly, her phone rang, and she thought it was Kyu calling to pay her wages from the previous day. Annoyed, she muttered, "Crazy." Unexpectedly, the lady in the car overheard this and angrily got out. She accused Jian of cursing at her. Jian quickly explained that someone had been constantly messaging her. She was just referring to the message sender. The woman reached out to see Jian's phone. When Jian was about to take her phone out, the woman snatched it directly. Jian wanted to say something but hesitated. To her surprise, it was a message from her mother. The woman thought she was lying. At this point, Jian hurriedly explained it was all a misunderstanding, but the woman thought she was mocking her. Jian's younger brother, who coincidentally witnessed this scene, bowed his head and apologized to me. Jian didn't know what to do, continuously bowing and apologizing, but the woman still had no intention of forgiving her. The woman said they had spent 10 million won here today. The manager swiftly identified them as VIP guests and promptly instructed Jian to apologize. Tense, Jian clenched her fists, pondered her family, and apologized. Her younger brother hesitated, glancing at his staff badge before entering to offer assistance. The woman still refused to forgive Jian. When asked why she had to apologize, Jian could only apologize. More people gathered, finding the actions of the other woman and her mother unreasonable at this point. Seeing his sister apologize, the younger brother felt distressed. After the incident, Jian returned to work like a lost soul, only to be demoted by the director. She handed over money, announcing she'd been transferred. Jian was puzzled as she had already apologized. The director explained it was the customer's request, adding Jian should have apologized sooner, because her delayed apology had displeased the customer. Jian laughed, a smile tinged with disappointment and injustice towards her life. On her way home in the evening, she tried to keep a smile on her face to avoid her family noticing. Suddenly, Duk-young found her, and Jian quickly moved aside. Duk-young explained that he didn't intend to humiliate her by asking for money that day, but her indifferent attitude had angered him. He demanded that she pay for the car repair and quickly return the money to him. Jian, feeling fearful, looked at her tightly clenched fists with tension. Duk-young then said he didn't need her money but wanted her to understand. Think twice before reacting in the heat of the moment. After speaking, he drove away. Feeling humiliated, Jian couldn't contain her emotions any longer. She sat on the ground, crying bitterly. Jian decided not to dwell on money matters any longer. Finally, she decided to call her birth mother, asking if she could borrow 20 million won. Today, Jian made a very elaborate breakfast. She talked about her decision to return to her birth mother with everyone. She decided to return to her birth mother, but her younger sister and brother were very surprised. Their mother explained Jian's true background. Her sister opposed her actions, but her brother thought about the scene of her sister having to bow down to others. He seemed very supportive of his sister returning to her wealthy birth mother. On the other side, Mrs. Du received a call from Jian's mother telling them that Jian was coming home. Duk-young was eager to meet his younger sister, but his daughter Seo-hyun was a bit worried about her sister's sudden return. Meanwhile, Jian received money from her birth mother. Duk-young was preparing to choose clothes to welcome his younger sister whom he had never met. At that moment, he received a call from Jian. Jian said she would repay him the money. They agreed to meet half an hour later, but Duk-young didn't want to see her. As he turned around, he saw Jian approaching. He swiftly donned sunglasses and offered a hand in greeting. Jian slowly approached and then stuffed 20 million won into his car. She told him to count the money quickly and write a receipt for her, then they went their separate ways. Seeing so much money, Duk-young thought she was burdened with interest, so he refused to accept the money. But Jian said the money was completely legal, then she threw the money into his hands. After arguing for a while, Duk-young still returned the money to Jian and quickly got into his car, closing the window. Jian angrily pounded on the car door. He opened the window and said, "Please take the money, I don't need it. Let's not see each other again in the future." Then Jian walked up to the front of the car, threw the bag of money onto the hood, and left. Duk-young wanted to chase after her but noticed the money was still on the car. He had to pick up the money again and shouted loudly, but Jian was already in a taxi. This person. Jian sat in the car and deleted Duk-young's number from her phone. Meanwhile, after returning to the company, Duk-young always wondered how Jian got so much money. He imagined Jian getting involved with loan sharks or selling herself for money, but Jian said she didn't sell herself. He then thought she might be doing shady jobs, but with her appearance, it seemed unlikely. He even thought about Jian selling her kidney. Forget it. The secretary then reminded him of the meeting. Duk-young asked the secretary how he would make 20 million won a day now. The secretary said he would ask his parents for help. At this point, Duk-young woke up, and at the same time, Jian's mother drove to meet her father. She explained everything that had happened recently to him. Her father didn't believe it. When the mother took the necklace, he realized that Jian replaced her younger sister Jisoo to meet the wealthy family. At the same time, he was also furious at his wife's actions. "I don't want to tell them that Jisoo is their daughter." "How could you?" "I know, we always treat Jisoo as our own daughter. We pretend not to know about the exchange of our child with theirs." The father felt his wife had committed a serious offense, knowing that Jian was about to visit the wealthy family. He wanted to return to Seoul to stop Jian, but Jian's mother said the ship had sailed. "If you speak out now, you'll lose both daughters at once. Moreover, if Jian lives with the wealthy family, she'll go to Japan and pursue her dreams." After hearing this, the father fell silent. He had to pretend he didn't know anything. "Hide it for as long as you can." But little did they know, this would hurt Jian deeply. The father, knowing his wife's actions, couldn't believe his daughter would leave for money. He asked Jian if she really wanted to move to that wealthy family's house. If she wanted to sail to Japan, he would find a way, even help her find a job she desired. But Jian said she wanted to go. When her father was about to tell her the whole truth, she suddenly stood up. She really didn't understand why he was trying so hard to stop her. Didn't he want her to have a better life? Why couldn't she be the daughter of a wealthy family? Her parents were indeed the chairman and chairwoman of the conglomerate. Why couldn't she go to their house? She just wanted to know why her parents initially rejected her. After hearing her daughter's heartfelt words, her father didn't know how to respond. He had to swallow the words he wanted to say. Jian ran into an alley and burst into tears, because the humiliation in her heart was something no one knew. Her younger sister then approached and asked, "Is it because the wealthy family has a lot of money that you want to leave? Why can't you just stay?" "Of course, I can't." "Why?" "Because they're your biological parents. I just want to go home. I hurt mom and dad. Leaving here means our parents are poor and incompetent. How could I hurt them like this?" Despite her sister's advice, Jian ultimately chose to leave. Because her inner turmoil was something she couldn't express to her family, and her father remained standing for 2 hours. He couldn't comprehend Jian's desire to visit the wealthy family until 2 police officers woke him up. In the wealthy family's kitchen, the lady had set up a separate room for Jian. Just then, she received a text message from Jian's mother. She said Jian would move in tomorrow. The lady of the house was delighted and promptly ordered the housekeeper to clean the house thoroughly. Meanwhile, Jian was packing her belongings to prepare for the move when Du-kyung came to greet her. "How are you at home?" Jian hurriedly pushed him downstairs. She questioned him about why he came here, but Du-kyung didn't want to speak to her and said he came this time to return the money, because he felt this money had unclear origins. Before Jian could react, Du-kyung pressed the money into her and ran off, and so, the two chased each other. Truly, a clash of enemies. Not sure about Do-kyung's reaction to Jian's visit tomorrow. After running, Do-kyung felt safe. It's unclear how long the two ran before Do-kyung felt they had reached a safe place. Just as he turned around, he saw Jian right next to his car. It turns out she had taken a shortcut and arrived in front of him. As Jian was about to throw the money at Do-kyung, he didn't expect her to miss. Jian dropped the money on the ground and pretended to call the police, saying someone was harassing her. Hearing this, Do-kyung, afraid, quickly picked up the money and said he never wanted to see Jian again in his life. After that, each went their separate ways. At this point, he noticed that his car key was missing. He hurriedly turned back to search but unexpectedly stepped into a pile of dung. Truly avoiding one pitfall only to fall into another. Then, when Du-kyung wanted to use his phone to call for help, he found the phone was still in the car. After that, Du-kyung asked a schoolgirl to borrow her phone, but she was afraid he would take it and run away, so she refused to lend it to him. Finally, the only option left for Du-kyung was to break the car window. Jian was very worried about her father. She kept calling her father, but no one answered. Meanwhile, her father was sitting by the river, drinking. He laughed. He laughed at his own uselessness. Unconsciously, he walked to the house they used to live in before going bankrupt. It turns out they were once a wealthy family, living happily together. When he woke up, it was early morning the next day. He hurriedly drove home because today is the day his daughter returns home. On the other hand, Du-kyung also prepared a gift to welcome his sister back. Jian, by now, had finished preparing her things. She prepared to move to the wealthy family's house. After bidding farewell to everyone, Jian got into the car and departed. At this point, her father hurriedly ran home after realizing Jian had just left. Her father kept calling Jian's name from behind. Jian seemed to sense something. When she was about to turn around, the housekeeper told her that from now on, she was no longer Jian. At that moment, Jian's father was seen running desperately in the rearview mirror, but the housekeeper deliberately told the driver to accelerate. Jian's father behind kept calling her name, but Jian in the car basically couldn't hear, yet he refused to give up, as the strength of a person could not match the power of a four-wheeled vehicle. Finally, he fell onto the road. From then on, the story of the underdog turning into the swan began. Since moving in with the wealthy family, Jian faced unfair opposition from Du-kyung. Du-kyung directly confronted her. "Why did you come to my house?" "My house? How did you find my house?" This caught Jian off guard, and Du-kyung thought she had followed him here, so he loudly criticized her. At this moment, Jian remembered what he had said before. "Never meet again. You can't meet him again. I've had enough of you. You've spent enough money." And then the butler came over. Du-kyung asked if the butler wasn't here to pick up his sister. Jian blamed herself for walking into the lion's den. At this point, he suddenly realized she was his sister. "She's his sister?" The butler confirmed it was true. "Oh my god. Moreover, he had previously made her pay for his car repair fees and even scolded her as a beggar. Even now, thinking about these things is really, and as the two were at a loss, the wealthy father arrived. The father saw Jian and immediately smiled happily. Then he led Jian into the house. Jian carefully entered to greet everyone. The mother immediately hugged her and the youngest sister Din also came to ask her. Everyone seemed very welcoming to Jian. At this time, Din gave her a gift. The mother asked where Dukyung's gift was. Dukyung embarrassedly said he forgot to buy it. Unexpectedly, the butler took out the flowers Dukyung had prepared in advance, which made him a bit confused. The mother gave her gift to Jian and told her to open it. It was a very beautiful necklace. The mother told Dukyung put it on Jian. No need. Dukyung immediately said wait until he buy it and do it later. Jian breathed a sigh of relief. The father also prepared a pen to give to Jian. Everyone in the house was laughing and talking happily. Only Dukyung didn't know what he was thinking. Then the mother took her to her room. At this time, the servant brought her luggage in. Jian was the last person to express her thanks. The mother was a little unhappy seeing that. She told her not to do that to the servants. Jian was a bit confused. The mother immediately said it was just their responsibility. Then when it was time to eat, Jian saw the food string in front of her eyes and didn't know how to use it. When she saw everyone taking a food string and placing it on her lap, once again, Jian was not careful and dropped her fork on the ground. She wanted to bend down to pick it up, but Dukyung told her not to move. At the same time, he walked behind Jian and told her to stand up. Jian didn't understand, then reluctantly stood up. At this time Dukyung took out the necklace from his pocket. He put it around her neck. Jian felt embarrassed standing still, while everyone praised her beauty. The mother also added another sentence. If she put on a little more makeup, she would be even more beautiful. She take Jian to the spa and get a new hairstyle. After more than a few hours, she became like this, beautiful. Everyone was in awe. Everyone feels like she has become a different person. Even Dukyung saw it and praised it endlessly. But Jian still felt something was unfamiliar. Not long after, her father gave her 100 million in spending money. This is the story of the ugly duckling turning into a swan in reality. At night Din came to tell her that she would have dinner with the whole family at 7 a.m. To build a good relationship with Din, she took the necklace to give to Din as a gift. But at night, lying on a bed worth up to 6 million, she couldn't sleep. The next day, at exactly 7 o'clock for breakfast, her mother gave her 100 million. Today it is necessary to spend all this money. This is her mission today. There's 100 million won in here. 100 million? Then she went to the mall. Jian immediately went in to see the products being promoted. But when she looked at the prices, she couldn't buy it because they were too cheap. She really had a headache as to how to spend so much money, buying clothes and watches for herself. But she still had a lot of money left, so she bought each family member a set of clothes. Not long after, she bought a bunch of things, then she went to her old house and introduced each gift to her mother. At this time, Jisoo walked over and took all the gifts Jian bought and brought them all out. At the same time, he also told her, I'm not a beggar, I don't need alms. When Jisoo said her father was chasing her and fell down the street, Jian was very worried. But at this moment Dukyung called. He asked her where she was when Jisoo suddenly called her father and was heard by Dukyung. Dukyung thought about Jisoo that he accidentally met a while ago, thinking that she had returned to her old home, so he lied to him that he would go to the shopping center 30 minutes later. Jian was extremely impatient. She quickly took the car to go to the shopping center. When he got to the garage, he took out all the things he bought for his adoptive parents and put them in the car, but Dukyung accidentally saw them. Next, she rushed to the cashier to pick up the bag she had deposited there. After finding Dukyung, the two went home. The mother wanted to see the items she bought. When Jian took out those items, the mother asked where was the receipt. Jian froze, not knowing what to say, because there were a lot of clothes she bought for her adoptive parents. When checked the receipt, she discovered that the number in it did not match the number. Jian finally admitted. Fortunately, the mother did not consider all of these things. When everyone had rested, Jian quietly ran out to handle the things she had bought for her adoptive parents. At this time, Hyuk called. While the two talked about money, this was heard by Dukyung nearby. He thinks Jian came into this house because of money. Without saying much, he immediately criticized her. Jian was about to explain when Dukyung interrupted. When you buy things for your adoptive parents' house, do you ever think about the feelings of this family member? That was my parents' money for her, but she didn't buy anything for her parents and Dan. Jian just kept silent. The next day, she returned all the clothes she bought for her adoptive parents and returned the remaining money to her biological mother. Not long after, the mother again found Jian to give her the daily schedule. Jian saw the tight schedule and was speechless for a moment. After a while, she had to go to the gym to practice to make her body more sexy. She is forced to replenish the knowledge lost over 25 years. In doing so, the wealthy family won't lose face. In the morning of physical education, the first step is to learn how to walk. As for Jian, in order to integrate into their lives, she proactively went into the room to find Dukyung and started talking, but they were discussing the jazz music. The two of them talked happily, but Jian didn't know what to say because she didn't understand music. Dookyung knew that she didn't understand music, so he asked if she felt this music was very good. Not bad, not bad. Just like that, they leaving her alone sitting there bewildered. It's really embarrassing to death. The next day, when Jian finished studying and was about to go home, she received a phone call. Hyuk called, said he was looking for her. Jian went to the rendezvous point with Hyuk. Right when I got off the bus, I accidentally dropped my phone. The driver was about to pick it up when Kian followed Jian. It turned out that Hyuk UC thought that Jian did illegal things because of the 20 million, immediately gave her the money and then told her to quit her job. But Jian couldn't tell him the truth, so she lied to trick him. When she went out to prepare to go home, she discovered her phone was gone. She quickly walked along the road searching. It was at this moment that conditions appeared behind her. Looking at Jian's attempt to break the lie, he decided not to say the phone was in his hand. Suddenly the phone rang and he quickly hid in a corner. At this time, Kian received a text message from the company to join the meeting. He decided to teach Jian a lesson. Just keep searching slowly. Jian searched and couldn't find her phone and was extremely nervous. The mother here called Jian and discovered that the other person had turned off the phone. She then called the housekeeper to ask if Jian was home yet, but the housekeeper said she wasn't home yet. At this time, the mother began to worry and quickly went to find her husband to clarify the situation. She fears Jian will disappear like 15 years ago. The husband was also extremely scared of his child because Kian was in a meeting at the moment and did not see his mother's phone call. Not long after Jian came home, her father asked her where she went. The mother suddenly rushed in without saying a word and immediately hugged Jian tightly. She was very afraid of losing her daughter again. When she knew her daughter had lost her phone, she didn't listen to her and told her that even if her phone was lost, she still had to go to school. Jian had to repeatedly apologize right at this moment because Kian returned. Even though he witnessed the scene, he never came forward to explain. The mother was afraid that she would lose Jian again, so she immediately forbade her to go out alone. From now on, Jian's freedom is gone. Dookyung returned to the room to take out Jian's phone but did not return it to her and put it in a drawer. At this time Jian's brother, Jitae, to increase sales. He was handing out leaflets on the street. At night, when he saw his girlfriend going on a blind date with another man, he immediately pulled Yuhai back. He got into an argument with Yuhai. It turns out that Jitae just wanted love and didn't want to get married, so Yuhai decided to go on a blind date. Yuhai was about to turn around and leave when Jitae immediately pulled her back. At this moment the father passed by. At this time, there are more and more people we know. Jitae finally said why he didn't want to get married. He is the eldest son of a poor family. He has no hope of marriage, so he will not get married. The reason he never wants to get married is because he doesn't want his child to suffer poverty like his father. So he won't get married. When the father heard his son's words, he blamed himself. He knew that because his business failed, his son had no money and could not get married. Jitae decides to give up on Yuhai. He dropped the bag on the ground, picked it up, put it in her hand, then turned and walked away. Yuhai saw him leave. She loves Jitae but cannot accept his poverty. In the end, the two people went in different directions. Are you willing to accept a handsome but poor man? How hard is it to be a child of a rich family? Because of the foul, he was grounded and was not allowed to go out. Even when she herself was sick, Jian did not dare to tell her family. Jian was heartbroken and cried all night. Today, Jisoo called her. On the phone came Jisoo's crying sound. After hearing that, Jian immediately ran towards her. Not long after, they arrived but discovered that Jisoo was drunk. After learning that Jisoo failed to confess her love, she got so drunk. She sadly hugged her and took Jisoo home. Mom told me that next time, if you have nothing to do, don't come here. Jian immediately explained that Jisoo was drunk, so she took her home. When Jian was about to call a taxi to go home, she saw her father coming home. She immediately hid in a corner and looked at her father from afar. She didn't know how to face him. At the same time, the mother learned that Jian dared to return to her adoptive mother's house on her own. She immediately brought all things she brought and threw them away. The sister also throws some sarcastic remarks. She is from a poor family. When Jian had just arrived home after realizing she was at fault, she immediately bowed down and apologized to her mother, but of course she still couldn't avoid being attacked by a spear. After she returned to her room, she discovered that all her things were gone, even her clothes had been thrown away. She went to the inn to ask about this matter. She immediately said it was the lady's order. All her things had been thrown into the trash. After hearing this, Jian felt angry and cried. That was her only memory with her family. Jian immediately ran to the trash to look for things, searched for an hour but couldn't find anything. She was crying. Jian sits on the bed, crying uncontrollably. Looking at the strange room in front of her, she felt extremely lonely and lost. She went to the kitchen and wanted to drink some wine to calm her nerves, but found that she didn't have a bottle of wine, so she sneaked out and tried to escape to buy alcohol. But she was discovered by Dookyung, who scared her and almost made her fall to the ground. She thought Dookyung would criticize her, but unexpectedly he immediately took a wooden doll and gave it to her. Seeing that, Jian was very happy. After Do-kyung learned that Jian wanted to drink, so he immediately took her out to drink. That night, they confided many things to each other. They decided they would forget all the sad things. She discovered that their family's wooden dolls were kept on the bedside table, without missing one. Jian immediately ran forward and hugged them. To others, these are just ordinary dolls. But to Jian, these are extremely important things to her. The next day when all the workers were cleaning, they even invited the most famous cleaning company because they were preparing to welcome a very important person. That is Jian's grandfather, who is also the chairman. In this family, he is the most powerful person. After he returned home, the thing he wanted to do most was meet Jian. When Jian first met her grandfather, she felt a little nervous and scared. He moved forward and hugged Jian. Jian also let go of the tension because of that. She also hugged her grandfather tightly. Seeing this, Dan was extremely jealous. Her mother, after seeing the reunion of her grandfather and grandson, was extremely touched. While eating, grandfather even took the initiative to pour wine for Jian. This is considered a great honor for her. He even picked up food for her, so you could see that her grandfather really liked this granddaughter. Moreover, he even lied to her to come to the group to work tomorrow. He wanted her to get used to the corporation's working environment as soon as possible. The next day she was downstairs at the corporation. She thought about previous injustices, helping people carry water rations and even being forced to go to the trash can to pick up bottles. Like this time when she came back, she used the identity of the leader. We are preparing to welcome a very important employee. Just as they were discussing who that person was, a series of powerful footsteps suddenly arrived. At this moment, it seemed like they were all eyes to look at that important character. Ha-young saw famous brands on Jian. Earplugs are also a type designed specifically. The Jian in front of them was completely different from the Jian who used to only wear cheap market clothes. After Ha-young calmed down, she was greet Jian, only Ha-young angry and returned to her seat. Jian decides to go make coffee for everyone. Then she went to the tea room and Ha-young also went there. She asked Jian why she was wearing designer clothes all over her body, but Jian did not reveal her true identity. Speaking of which, since the last time she used their relationship to steal my position, they are no longer friends. When Ha-young heard that, he didn't care at all and turned around to leave. After returning to her position, she told everyone that Jian's personal life was not clean. Otherwise, how could anyone suddenly buy a bunch of branded items like that? But her colleagues spoke in favor of Jian. During the meeting, everyone was talking about proposals to celebrate the company's 14th anniversary. The director asked Ha-young how the situation had progressed, but Ha-young said she is still planning. This made the director extremely unhappy. 5 colleagues said that there was a plan proposed. Let her continue working. At this time, Jian was extremely surprised that her initial plan had been cancelled by the company, but the director explained that after she left, they felt that her project was very good, so learning that her project was selected by the company, she was extremely happy. At night, everyone kept asking Jian how she felt on her first day at work. Jian said at first it was a bit shy, but then it got much better. Furthermore, she also told everyone that she would be in charge of organizing. Do-kyung said, "Why isn't this project your name?" Jian said that because she had been dismissed by the company before. He said he would try his best. The next day, everyone was spreading the news that Do-kyung had become vice president. At this time, Ha-young arrogantly said that she had met Do-kyung. He and her father played golf together. After hearing this, the colleagues were extremely surprised that Jian, who was while having dinner, Myung-hee awkwardly started talking to the ladies and ignored her existence. Unexpectedly, she directly told everyone about Myung-hee when she found her daughter. This made her extremely surprised, because before the grandfather ordered everyone to keep this matter a secret. Myung-hee never expected that this matter would be revealed in today's meeting. Surely someone secretly brought this up to the outside. The ladies, after hearing this, blamed her for hiding such a big matter from them. Because didn't want to offend the ladies, Myung-hee could only say that in a few days they would announce this to the outside world. But her words still did not calm the ladies down. And Myung-hee's opponent wants to meet her daughter today. And the ladies also very much agreed with this idea. From the looks of it, they really wanted to see her lose face, remembering Jian's shrieking appearance, but she did not dare to offend those ladies. After receiving her mother's phone call, she wanted her to be there within an hour to welcome a few important guests. Jian immediately said she was very ugly, but she still had to act like she didn't hear anything, then told that she had to be here in an hour, then turned off the phone. Jian was extremely confused as to what to do, so she immediately called Do-kyung for help. Do-kyung also realized recognized by people, they were definitely trying to defame her and his mother. He immediately called his secretary and told him to immediately prepare 10 sets of the highest quality clothes. At this time, Jian was washing her face and suddenly received a phone call from Do-kyung. Dressed right in the car, put on her bracelet, and after a while she finally got out of the car, beautiful, to the meeting place. After getting there, Do-kyung told her, "The rest is up to you." She is very stressed. Do-kyung says, "You're different now. Now I am the golden lady of a tycoon family. And the ladies here are blaming Myung-hee for why Jian hasn't come yet. She immediately said she will come in 5 minutes. It was at this moment that the waiter came. She touched the wound on her leg and suddenly remembered what her adoptive mother said to her. At that time, her mother once told her and Jisoo that when she was only 1 month old, she was injured. If I was a month old at that time, then I was born in 1991. Eun-suk went missing in August 1992, when she was 3 years old. So she is not Eun-suk. She was really panicking. She is not the daughter of a bad family. This mother found her daughter who had been lost for 25 years. Unexpectedly, she discovered that she was not her biological daughter. She quickly called her adoptive mother to confirm the result, and her adoptive mother immediately turned off her phone. This made her even more confused. Then she immediately looked for the housekeeper and asked her how she knew that she was the missing daughter of this family. The housekeeper said she did a DNA test. She put down the doubts in her heart and drank a glass of cold water. And remember what my foster mother said before. You are the golden lady that my mother found. She finally lost her doubts. During dinner, Jian asked her mother if she had a photo of her when she was a child. Mom said that year, my grandfather threw it all away to make everyone forget her. At this time, her father asked her whether she had a photo of herself as a child or not. Jian said that because her family was poor when she was young, she moved house all the time. Her photos are also gone because of that. The next day at work, Do-kyung, as vice president, went to the sales department to find out the situation. Jian clearly explained to the conference the plan to celebrate the company's 40th anniversary. After Do-kyung heard this, he immediately praised Jian. Remembering the past, Jian had to suffer resentment here. He asked the director why he wrote Ha-young's name on this project in the past. Unexpectedly, Ha-young directly said that he told her to do that. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone was surprised. The director became even more bewildered, not expecting to encounter such a clumsy teammate. The director explained that it was because Jian resigned, so Ha-young was chosen to replace her. But Do-kyung made every effort to blame him. How dare they take advantage of other people's projects like that? Then asked Jian if they should be fired or how to handle it now. But the honest Jian said that now the project is hers, it's okay for them to know they were wrong. Do-kyung tells Jian to take a trip to his office. Jian was a bit surprised because it was very difficult for the company to meet the vice president and she had such a privilege. After arriving at the office, the two talked happily. She immediately returned to her department. All of her colleagues deliberately treated her well to create relationships, completely changing their attitudes compared to before. When Jian went to the tea room to make coffee, the director specially gave her a gift certificate. Also said that this is a benefit for employees. Jian took the gift certificate to her adoptive parents' house, but there was no one in the house. She was about to write a piece of paper and leave when she suddenly remembered her father's words. She immediately took out the photo album in the house and looked at it. Are there any photos of her? No. She looked for a photo to take together, but when she opened the album, she discovered there were no photos of her. Jian feels very strange, so when she got off work, she called Jisoo to ask about her photography. Jisoo said her mother often cried looking at her photos. This makes Jian even more skeptical about her identity. To clarify this matter, she went to her brother, who said that year her mother had spent several months at her grandmother's house. After returning, she immediately discovered that Jisoo had changed. Mom told him that it was because Jisoo grew up that he changed like that. After hearing this, Jian was extremely confused. She immediately ran to the internet room to find information related to the disappearance. Finally found Eun-suk's photo. Because the photo was so blurry, she couldn't tell if it was her. So she came to my house again and started searching for her photos. Soon she finds Jisoo's photo in a box. She quickly took out Jisoo's photo and the photo online. Finally discovered that he was indeed not Eun-suk. Her sister is Eun-suk. The tycoon family offers a reward of 6 billion won to whoever finds the daughter. 25 years later, they finally found her but didn't know it was a mistake. After Jian learned the truth of the incident, Jian could not accept that her mother wanted her to study abroad and lied to her. Jian understands the fear of that tycoon family. This will have consequences for their entire lives. What should I do? Parents. What should I do? While she was grieving, the company called and asked her to leave immediately. It turns out that Do-kyung's uncle is not satisfied with her plan. Jian arrived at the company and the director told her to quickly handle the project and submit it no later than tomorrow afternoon. Jian has to work overtime until late at night. She was still thinking about her identity in her mind, unable to concentrate on writing a plan. After all, the plan still has to be done. Jian was so busy that she didn't get home until 3 a.m. Jian hopes that this journey will have no end, because now she's really scared to return to that rich house. She reached the door of the house but she did not dare to enter. When Jian turned around to leave, Do-kyung called her back. He asked her why she came back and then wanted to leave. She said she wanted to get some fresh air and then ran into her room, to the room that originally belonged to Jisoo. Jian laughed, a helpless smile before life. Breakfast the next day Jian didn't came. The housekeeper said she had already arrived at the company at 5 a.m. The father immediately complimented Jian's personality, which was exactly like her mother's. Both are strong women who love work. Jian is currently editing the plan. The cleaning lady walked in and was startled. Jian turned to look at the clock, 7:40. At noon, Do-kyung scheduled lunch with Jian, but she fibbed, claiming she had already ordered. Now she is very afraid of coming into contact with that tycoon family. Jian didn't even dare to use the card her mother gave her. Without money, Jian could only eat street food. She was looking at Jisoo's photo when Jisoo called. Hearing Jisoo's voice, Jian wanted to cry even more. Jisoo said Dad's hand was injured. Jian couldn't help but burst into tears. She said a few words and then turned off the phone. Jian remembers the old days. Her father didn't want her to go to that rich house. She also blamed him for not wanting her to live a better life. Now that she knows it, he wants the best for her. At this time, Do-kyung drove by and saw alone, Jian sitting there without even ordering food. He thought Jian was working so he didn't bother her anymore. In the afternoon, Jian submitted the plan to the director. The director was very happy. He gave the plan to Do-kyung and praised himself for putting great pressure on Jian. That's why the new plan was completed so quickly. Now Do-kyung understands why Jian is so tired. The director was waiting for a reward when Do-kyung scolded him. At this moment, Jian was breathing air, deciding to tell the truth to her mother today. Returning home at night, Jian was about to speak when a woman ran in. She knelt before her mother. It turns out that this is the person who revealed Jian's news. The mother wanted to punish her, so she cut both her husband and son's jobs. No company even accepts them anymore. No matter how much this woman begged, the mother still did not waver. She added that if she dared to trick her again, there would be more dire consequences. Jian stood still and watched the incident. Jian was scared to leave. Dan saw that and thought Jian was afraid of the scene just now. So comfort her, this is just a light punishment. Mom hates people who lie to her the most. Before, someone said bad things about Do-kyung and then their entire family died. Jian was even more scared. She immediately ran out. She didn't know how to face that rich family. She returned home and asked her mother why she had to lie and why she and Jisoo were exchanged. The mother was silent. At this moment the father also entered. Jian immediately blamed her father for not telling her at that time. She said she was miserable every day. I don't dare to use the bank card. I don't even dare sleep in that bed. Come with me, go tell them the truth. A while later they arrived at that tycoon. The mother was very surprised by their appearance. She asked what happened to the two of them. Their daughter is not Jian, she is Jisoo. They still heard him wrong, so they asked him to explain again. The rich dad grabbed him. At this time, Jian returned from work and saw the scene before her eyes. She quickly ran to kneel in front of her parents. Those people slowly turned towards her. Even though it was just a dream, it was also the image in her heart right now. Look at the clock, it's only 4 o'clock. At this moment, Tae-soo also seemed to feel something. She went to the park that she used to go to with her father. She looked up and saw her father sitting in the old chair. Jian was extremely surprised, but she did not dare to approach. She could only watch from afar. Then she went to the company again. Seeing that the anniversary is coming, Jian silently makes a decision. While at work, she told the director that on her anniversary she wanted some human resources. The director said it was reasonable. So who do you need? I need Ha-young. Ha-young? Everyone was extremely surprised. Jian said that besides herself, only Ha-young understood this plan. The reason for doing so is because Jian wants to quickly leave this company. She didn't want the group's 40th anniversary to have problems because of her. She decided to let Ha-young participate, and at the same time wanted Ha-young to ensure that even without her, the operation would go smoothly. Ha-young agrees. At night, Jian walked like a lost soul. She was about to go to a convenience store to buy miscellaneous food for dinner when Do-kyung pulled her back. She was startled with fear. Do-kyung didn't say anything, he just told her to quickly get in the car. In the car, Jian has never seen Do-kyung so cold. She thought she had been discovered, so she was worried. When she got off the bus, Do-kyung didn't wait for her. When Jian arrived home, the whole family was waiting for her. Waiting for her to sit down, the rich mother told her to answer honestly. Jian is ready for the worst to happen. Rich grandfather requested a press conference to publicize Jian's true identity. Do-kyung quickly calls Jian. He said he would reveal her identity today. Jian was extremely scared because she knew she was just a fake lady. If this story is published, it will affect that rich family. What should I do? A press conference has been prepared. Grandpa was about to announce Jian's identity when she suddenly appeared and interrupted him. She wanted to have a chance to speak. With her grandfather's consent, she walked to the podium to speak. She started telling how she and Do-kyung met. To prove the authenticity of the incident, she also invited the staff present at the hall that day. She then held up the photo and explained that this was when she asked for Do-kyung's part-time salary. She even held out her phone to show everyone the money conversation. Someone asked how to prove that this is her account. Jian had prepared in advance, so she showed the printed proof data. After comparing and determining the same number, she also showed the data she found to everyone. Grandpa looked proudly at Jian. After finishing, Du-kyung invited everyone to eat, but Jian lied that she had something to do so she couldn't go, and then she worked overtime alone. Unexpectedly, it was 1 a.m. She went to the convenience store to drink alcohol. At this time, only alcohol can numb her nerves so she can't think about her own business. At this moment, Du-kyung walked over. Because to thank Jian for today, he wanted to hug her, but she pushed him away. She really couldn't stand this torment anymore. She turned the card over to Du-kyung. Jian said she was not his sister, her mother switched her and Jisoo. He said his mother was very careful and did a DNA test, so it was definitely because I drank too much. Jian said it was true that DNA was done, but the wound on her leg was the clearest proof. Du-kyung found the situation too vague, so he angrily returned home. He intended to ask his parents to clarify the situation. Jian begged him not to tell everyone the truth, because she is afraid that her rich mother will harm her parents, and will even leave her whole family unemployed. She wants Du-kyung to give her a chance, so she can complete the company's celebration and make up for this mistake. If you do that, you will probably be able to ask for their forgiveness. After all, after living together for so long, Du-kyung is soft-hearted. At this time the mother called. Jian opened the phone without knowing what to say. Du-kyung took her phone and told her to help her. He returned alone. When he got home, Du-kyung thought about everything. He cannot accept the fact that Jian is not his sister. Jian returned to the room and looked at the bed. She didn't dare lie down to sleep. She helplessly crawled on the edge of the bed. At 5 a.m., she quickly woke up. She didn't dare stay another minute. After taking a shower, she stepped out and accidentally ran into Du-kyung. He knew she was afraid of meeting people. Later, during the meal, Du-kyung told everyone that Jian was feeling tired from work, so he let her take a nap. When her parents left, Du-kyung opened Jian's room door and saw Jian curled up on the edge of the bed. Even though he wasn't his brother, he still felt very heartbroken. Have you ever met a daughter-in-law like this? Didn't need money, bought her husband's parents a washing machine, because to help her husband's parents pay off their debt, she only eats instant noodles. She didn't even need a wedding dress. When Jian knew her brother was about to get married, she immediately went to Du-kyung, begging him to help her until her brother got married. Du-kyung immediately refused. The next day, due to Ha-yun's negligence, the company's celebration had problems. Faced with Du-kyung's questioning, she didn't know anything. Du-kyung knows this is important to Jian. He went to Jian and said he would agree to hide it until her brother got married, but he had one condition. That is, she must not let her parents see anything unusual nor hide from them. Then Du-kyung took her home. He said a few words to her parents. Jian was about to return to the company when her mother asked her why she didn't swipe her card. Jian said she was afraid people would find out her identity, so she only used cash. When she got back to the company and saw a photo of herself when she was happy, she burst into tears. She wants to return to those days but can't anymore. She tiredly returned home and saw a gift box on the table. She put the gift box in the closet. Seeing her father treat her so well, the feeling of guilt became even stronger. Du-kyung knows that Jisoo is his biological sister. He couldn't help but go to her place of work, pretending to accidentally meet her. Then the two sat down to eat together. Seeing that Jisoo only ordered a sandwich, Du-kyung thought her family had no money, so he was extremely heartbroken. Jisoo told Du-kyung that it wasn't difficult at all. The person who had the hardest time was Jian. Every time she was upset, Jian helped her solve it. Du-kyung now knows that Jian also has a difficult life. The next day, they were discussing the plan when Jian's phone rang. Grandpa said he wanted to go abroad for a while, so he asked Du-kyung and Aunt to come to his house today. Du-kyung was afraid that she would reveal a mistake, so he called him and said the car had broken down. Unexpectedly, his aunt was there. Hearing him say the car broke down, he said he would call someone to pick them up. Du-kyung had to take Jian to a deserted area. In order for the lie from before to become true, he only had to destroy the car. Jian went online to find a way to break the car's brakes. She then got out of the car to command Du-kyung. Seeing that Du-kyung was ready, she immediately signaled. Seeing that Jian seemed unable to do it, Du-kyung said she would bribe her aunt's driver. Finally managed to break the brake cable. Jian watches Du-kyung show off his achievements. Du-kyung was also happy and laughed. Seeing her simple appearance, the flame of love in him suddenly flared up. He shyly hid in the car. Jian talked to him, but he didn't dare look her in the face. Then he got out of the car and lifted the stone out. Then he received his phone call again. Afraid that the road to the airport would be blocked, he decided to go ahead and tell the two people not to come over anymore. Two people were stuck in this deserted place. Jian works every day until dawn. That day, to make the company's celebration a success, she drove alone to the deep mountains to find a shaman to help her. Unfortunately, the car got stuck in a quagmire and she couldn't drive through. Jian immediately got out of the car to check. She discovered the rut was very deep. She took out her phone and was about to call for help when she discovered there was no signal. Over here, Do-kyung called her but couldn't get through. He was very worried. At this time the secretary walked in and told him the temperature in the mountains was now -2 degrees. Do-kyung thought about Jian's thin clothes as she left. It will definitely happen. He immediately went to the supermarket to buy a long fur coat. Before paying, he quickly left. On the way he called Jian but no one picked up. A while later he reached that mountain area. At this moment, seeing Jian's car, he quickly got out to check the situation but could not see Jian's trace. Co Jian. There was no reaction. He guessed Jian might have gone up the mountain. He took the fur coat and ran after it. It went on like that until night. At this time, Jian was also injured in her leg. Her cold arms hugged her body. She unfortunately stepped on a stone and fell down. What should do now? She heard someone calling her. She quickly stood up to find that voice. At this time, Do-kyung came. She looked at Do-kyung in surprise. How could he be here? Do-kyung didn't say anything and ran to put on her coat. Do-kyung dressed her while blaming her for not knowing how to bring an extra shirt when going out. The fire of love is rekindled. Jian said he had received his shaman's consent. He said he would come help at the 40th anniversary. Do-kyung then raised his flashlight to light the way. Jian walked ahead. The two of you go together. Jian intended to let Do-kyung go first, while he stayed to wait for the tow truck to arrive, but Do-kyung did not agree. She had to sit in Do-kyung's car and go home together. At this moment, her mind was filled with the image of Do-kyung wearing her shirt. She thought it was because she was crazy. To make Jian happier, Do-kyung took her to eat at a place she used to love the most. Jian was even more hesitant because Do-kyung had never eaten cheap food before. Jian poured rice into the pot but she didn't want to eat it. She doesn't want to eat anything. Then they drove back. Jian was so tired that she fell asleep by the window. Arriving at the house, Do-kyung intended to wake her up, but seeing how tired she looked, he was extremely heartbroken. He didn't have the heart to wake her up. He decided to stay in the car with her for a while. The daughter that the tycoon family spent 6 billion to find turns out to be a fake. After Jian learned the truth, she was tormented inside and could not accept this truth. To atone for her sins, every day, she worked all night long. Finally, under Jian's efforts, the anniversary took place. Everyone slowly entered the hall. The main performance in this activity is the dyer's performance. A normal cloth is dipped into a vat of dye. The white cloth changed color under everyone's eyes. Jian did not take his eyes off the hall at all. From afar, Do-kyung was always watching her. Do-kyung comes to check if the dyed fabric is dry or not. He discovered that an important new product had disappeared. She hurriedly called but couldn't get through. The situation is extremely urgent. If the cloth cannot be found, the event will fail. On this side, the news has also been transmitted to senior leaders. Unfortunately, the new fabric was stuck in traffic so it couldn't arrive on time. At this time, Jian also disappeared. Everyone present was filled with fear. When the event was about to start, Jian suddenly came forward holding a cloth. It turned out that the dyer had previously given her a cloth. She quickly drove the shipper to get the fabric. When Do-kyung found out, he was extremely surprised. Looking at the wound on her leg, he understood everything. Finally, the event took place successfully. The chairman was also very satisfied with this event. He rewarded them with 100 million won. Mrs. No was also very satisfied with Jian. In the evening, everyone gathered together to celebrate. After the party ended, Do-kyung asked Jian to wait there for him. Then he took a taxi for the drunk people to go home first. When Do-kyung turned around, Jian was nowhere to be found. When he was about to leave, he suddenly saw her sitting on the ground. This scene made him a little sad. Because after today, she will leave the company and will tell the president and his wife the truth. Thinking of this, Jian is not very scared. Do-kyung couldn't help but pat her head. He knew he was attracted to Jian. Do-kyung wiped her tears and said, "Let's not see each other again." But in the end he still kissed her. Suddenly the car lights came. It turned out that the secretary came to pick them up and return. Do-kyung explains that he drank too much. On this side, President Choi received a letter saying Jian was not their biological daughter. He suddenly remembered Jian's recent unusual behavior. He went to the hospital for a DNA test. Do-kyung stood in front of the car door practicing greetings many times. The elevator door opened. Do-kyung suddenly jumped back, but Jian acted like nothing happened. Jian greeted him very naturally. Do-kyung prepared medicine to bring to the company and gave it to her. Jian received the medicine and said thank you. As everyone discussed yesterday's event, they spotted Ha-young appear. At this point everyone knew she was the one who stole the cloth. At this time, Ha-young also walked in, saying he came to hand in his resignation letter. Do-kyung says, "Who allowed you to quit your job?" Ha-young got scared immediately. The director asked, "Is this you?" But she refused to admit it. Finally, Ha-young admitted his brazen actions. She said it was because she was jealous of Jian. Based on what? Jian just returned and was given important responsibility. Jian starts to feel sad. Ha-young said he would compensate the company's losses. Young says not only must she be compensated, but she must also be arrested. After hearing this, Young immediately panicked. At this time, someone from the legal department stepped in and took her to the police station. Young, now afraid, quickly said his father was President Yoon but still did not receive everyone's forgiveness. Young couldn't take his eyes off Jian. He silently watched her work. Young and the secretary went out to talk. Jian saw an iron on the girl's head. Jian quickly rushed forward and used her hand to support the iron. Jian's hand was severely burned. When Jian poured cold water on the burn, she suddenly received a phone call from Dan. Dan was recognized by a woman as a minor, who then beat her. Dan didn't dare go home, she could only ask Jian to help. At this time, Young also called. Dan quickly hung up. Jian took her to the shopping center to choose clothes. Young couldn't contact Jian, so he went to the hall to find her. Young rushed to the medical room but still couldn't see her sign. Thinking she had gone to the hospital, Young asked the secretary to contact all the nearby hospitals to ask if anyone had been burned by an iron. As for me, I ran to large and small hospitals to search, but in the end I couldn't find it. Young was very impatient. He suddenly saw Jian getting out of the taxi. She thought something was wrong, so she was extremely worried. Young was angry. Then she raised her burned hand to see. Jian quickly said that it was just a superficial injury. At this moment, Young felt that his attitude was a bit excessive. There were a lot of people around. At this moment Jian felt something. Young felt the same way. The two awkwardly walked in different directions. Jian finally confirms her feelings, but she can't, because she was worried that her family would be in danger. While eating, Dan received a photo. That is an intimate photo of her and the driver. This made her extremely scared. Dan quickly said she felt a bit uncomfortable. She immediately ran to the room. What should we do now? If her mother finds out about it, she will not forgive her. At this time, the phone rang. Dan quickly answered the phone. She asked for 6 billion won. After hearing this, Dan was extremely scared. She quickly went to the driver to confirm. When he heard the driver admitted himself, Dan was completely disappointed. The woman who beat her that day was his wife. The driver promised to divorce his wife, but Dan said they couldn't be together. Jian gave her job back to the director because she was about to resign. When Jian saw Young coming in, she quickly dodged. Young thought she had something urgent. When he was about to go forward, he seemed to understand something. Jian intentionally tried to avoid it, so he just had to step back. This made him extremely afraid. Young returned to the office confused. He asked his secretary to arrange a tight work schedule for him. He wants to use busy work to forget his feelings. During another company event, Jian seemed lost. He didn't know what to do. When he turned his head, he saw Jisoo waving at him. Jian saw her sister and quickly ran away. At this time, Young did not see Jian anywhere. I could only lie that Jian was out handling work, then sent Jisoo out the door. Jian told everything to her best friend. She sadly said she didn't dare face Jisoo. If Jisoo knows the truth, what will happen? At this time Mrs. No also called. Jian hesitated for a while and finally picked up the phone. Mrs. No said he would wait until the event was over to invite Jian and her adoptive mother to eat. Jian immediately panicked. She decided to tell everything tonight. Jian placed her resignation letter on the director's desk. She was forced to do so. Jian then calls Young to apologize, hoping the two can meet one last time. Young immediately agreed, but when Jian arrived at the meeting point, she began to panic. I dare to tell the truth to my parents. This is my final success. She was afraid to face her parents. Young thought Jian was about to confess his love. Why are you looking at me with those eyes? Who are you? Because I kissed you. That's right, I like you so I kissed you. I could even sleep with you. Jian burst into tears, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Young tells her that he will marry the girl designated by his parents. After speaking, he coldly left, leaving Jian alone to cry bitterly. In the end, I still didn't have a chance to explain why I asked him to go out. At this time Mrs. No sent a message. She said everyone was waiting for her to return. She stood in front of the house that did not belong to her. After sending messages to everyone, she immediately turned off her phone. As soon as she entered President Choi's house, she asked who dared to impersonate her. Before Jian could tell the whole truth, she was suddenly put in a passive position. Mrs. No looked at the test report. Above it was written 0.001% blood relationship. This proved that Jian was not their daughter. I originally planned to tell everyone the truth today. Does that mean you already knew? President Choi immediately understood. She had known for a long time that she was not their biological daughter but had always hidden her identity. Jian knelt down to explain, but in everyone's eyes, it was just an excuse. They even kicked Jian out of the house in the middle of the night. She turned her eyes to ask for help, but no one saved her. President Choi told her to get out of the house. At this time, Mrs. No still doesn't believe the truth that Jian is not her daughter. Butler gang, quickly throw her out. Jian was extremely scared and ran out in panic. Reaching the gate, she fell to the ground. At this moment, she felt extremely lost. Not long after, Chairman Choi aggressively arrived at Mr. Seo's house. Ji-tae and Sunwo heard the argument and quickly ran downstairs. Chairman Choi criticized them for daring to do this. Mr. Seo could only bow his head and apologize. At this moment, Mrs. Seo returned. She took all the blame upon herself. Chairman Choi is furious, but the important thing is to find his daughter. Following Mr. Seo's eyes, the chairman looked towards Jisoo. She left home. The two fathers saw this and quickly chased after her. At this time, Jian was leaning against the wall and trudging back home. When he was about to stop the car, he remembered what his mother said, that his father had gone to Jian's house to settle the matter. Because he agreed to protect their family, he immediately drove all the way to their house. Jisoo ran so fast that after a while, she was no longer seen. Chairman Choi couldn't find his daughter, so he immediately vented his anger on Mr. Seo. This scene was witnessed by Jian. She covered her mouth in fear. Only then did Do-kyung chase him there. At the same time, Ji-tae also ran to see the scene before his eyes and didn't know what to do. Do-kyung quickly went to stop his father. He promptly left in anger. Jian is running away. She doesn't know what to do. She even felt scared of this world. In the car, Do-kyung called but couldn't get through. Unexpectedly, he misunderstood her. Jian has nowhere to go, sitting on the side of the road. She decided to say goodbye to this world. At this time, Mrs. Seo also went to Chairman Choi's house to apologize. She wants to make Jian live in pain all her life. After hearing this, Mrs. Seo immediately knelt down, begging not to involve her children. But Mrs. No was determined to make their family suffer. Only then did Mrs. Seo understand. When she got home, she quickly told her husband about this. Upon hearing the news, Mr. Seo's hands trembled with anxiety. He rushed to the company to beg Chairman Choi. He said Jian had no intention of hiding forever. Because before telling them the truth, she asked her parents to go to the police station and surrender. Only then did President Choi remember what Jian said that night. I asked my parents to go to the police station tomorrow to surrender. At this point, his anger subsided somewhat. Mr. Seo promised that after finding Jian, they would proactively turn themselves in. Looking at Jisoo sleeping soundly, he felt extremely guilty in his heart. Mrs. Seo was also suffering because she cannot find her daughter. Jian had no one to rely on. She could only sleep under the stairs. Every day Mr. Seo wakes up early to wait for his daughter to return. Jisoo sees her father looking forward to her sister every day. She feels like she's not receiving love from her parents. She has made a decision. She returned home, packed her belongings, saying she would go back to her biological parents' home. After speaking, she turned around and left. The couple hurriedly chased after their daughter, but Jisoo got into the car and told the driver to leave quickly. She decided to leave. She sat down on the ground crying. Just because of her rash actions, she lost both of her daughters. Jian is sitting by the beach. Recalling past memories, their family was very happy at that time. Unfortunately, time cannot come back. Jian took out her phone and looked at the photos of herself and Do-kyung together, deciding to forget everything. After sending all the photos to Do-kyung, she turned off her phone and threw it into the ocean. At this time, after Do-kyung received the photo, he hurriedly called Jian but could not contact her. On this side, Jian entered the forest alone. She is no longer afraid when facing the dark. She pulled out the bottle of sleeping pills she had prepared in advance from her pocket. She poured the medicine into her hand, then stuffed it all into her mouth and finally fell to the ground. She wants to apologize to everyone. She was really tired of this life. Mom, Dad, goodbye, Do-kyung, I still can't forgive myself. Poor Jian has suffered too much hurt and too many wishes, but in the end still cannot forgive herself. The tycoon family finally found their daughter who had been missing for 20 years, but this daughter was a bit strange. There was a lot of delicious food on the table, but she ate instant noodles. Jisoo said this is the best dish. Seeing her eating like a hungry tiger, even making sounds while eating, made her mother look bored. Daein criticized her for making too much noise while eating. Jisoo said that eating like that is attractive. Mrs. No was angry but couldn't do anything. Not long ago, Jisoo brought a suitcase and returned to her parents' house in the middle of the night. The whole family was surprised by her appearance because Jisoo did not notify anyone. Her biological mother was concerned and asked why she came here. "Isn't that your house? Why can't I come?" She was taken to Jian's old bedroom. Jisoo immediately said that she didn't like this style, so she asked to change to another room. The butler could only agree. After that, Jisoo went downstairs to drink water, but she was interrupted by Mrs. No stopped. She told her to let the maid do it. "Just drink water, you're not disabled." Jisoo suddenly saw a large TV. She immediately ran to see it. Mrs. No quickly reminded her not to watch TV at night. At this time, the butler brought water and Jisoo politely said thank you. Look at this girl's appearance. An arrogant person like Mrs. No was so angry that he couldn't speak. She quickly went to her husband to confide. Why are two people growing up in the same environment so different? President Choi said this is our daughter. The next day, during breakfast, the sound made while eating made everyone stop eating and turn to watch Jisoo eat. No couldn't stand it anymore either. She wanted to stop her daughter's actions, but Jisoo didn't pay attention to her expression. At the same time, he said he didn't come here as Insu, just because he had nowhere to go. Mrs. No thought he had heard wrong. Then she stood up and left the dining table. Daein was extremely surprised, because no one in the family had ever dared to confront her mother before. Mrs. No was so angry that he had to quit work. She went to bed and thought about life. Not long after, we went to Jisoo's room. My head was filled with Jian's image. She began to remember the time she lived with Jian. Soon it was time for dinner. Daein reminded Jisoo not to put her hands on the table while eating. Jisoo asks why. This is the basic etiquette when eating. Where? This statement made everyone not know how to answer. Mrs. No was angry but couldn't do anything. President Choi quickly said. He said you can eat whatever you want. Mrs. No said no matter how angry you are, you must not show your attitude towards others. What should I do if I'm angry and can't vent it? If you can vent, it will be more comfortable. Everyone is not an outsider. Jisoo complains that if it weren't for her wearing an expensive diamond hairpin for her 3-year-old daughter that year, she wouldn't have been carried away by bad guys. This statement left President Chun with nothing more to say. The next day, Mrs. No returned from work. She went straight to the bathroom because she couldn't accept the truth. She asked the housekeeper to do a test to confirm. He even said the housekeeper must do it in the shortest possible time. Thinking that Jisoo is not her daughter, Mrs. No is fun, but the truth is always cruel. So Mrs. No decided to spend money to beautify her daughter. First go to the spa, then get a stylish hairstyle. Even Jisoo didn't recognize herself in the mirror. She gently stroked her hair, thinking to herself that she was so beautiful. Even the housekeeper was amazed by her beauty. After returning home, everyone praised her transformation. Being praised, Jisoo was very happy. Then everyone sat at the dining table. While eating, Jisoo returned to her true appearance. She used a salad knife to cut the beef. Daein reminds her that she used the wrong knife. Jisoo says it's no different. Mrs. No once again reminded that this is etiquette at the dinner table. Jisoo said she had never seen them at her house. Jisoo couldn't help but burst out laughing. Do-kyung quickly reminded his sister not to laugh or joke during meals. Jisoo said he knew. She also criticized steak as not being as good as grilled meat. President Chun saw his daughter being so naive, he also had to laugh. And Mrs. No next to him was very angry. Every day Mrs. No both gave Jisoo 30 million won. At first she thought she said it wrong. Mrs. No said learning to spend money was her first lesson. Jisoo says it's no problem. Then leave the house. Looking at the teacher's excitement, Mrs. No thinks that she will definitely spend money more aggressively than Jian. Who would have thought that Jisoo did not go to the shopping center, but went to the market stalls to buy a lot of discounted clothes. She bought a lot of things and even stopped by for street food. In the end, she donated 29.9 million won. The whole family is waiting for Jisoo to return. A while later, Jisoo returned with a bunch of things, all of them cheap. Everyone could only stand and watch. Mrs. No asked why she didn't go to the shopping center but instead to the market. Jisoo said there were a few stalls opened by her friends, so she went there to support. Daein curiously asked if she bought all of this for 30 million won? Only 10,000 won? Mrs. No asked her where was the remaining money. Jisoo said she donated it all. Mrs. No angrily asked her why she didn't spend the money on herself. Which normal person would ask for 30 million won a day? Only crazy people. Mrs. No was so angry that he couldn't speak. This is Jian. Why is she in this fishing village? At this time, Mr. Seo still did not know that he had cancer. His hair has also turned white from searching for her missing daughter Jian. He didn't know that Jian had taken sleeping pills in the woods. Do-kyung investigated all the cameras in the area, even bringing Jian's photo to the bus station to search. In the end, there's still no clue. A month later, Hyuk and Jisoo went to the beach to work. When they were about to return, they suddenly saw someone who looked very similar to Jian. Hyuk didn't pay attention and followed Jisoo back. Halfway there, he suddenly remembered the scene just now. Hyuk doubted whether that person was Jian. Thinking of this, he immediately stopped the car. He said he had something important to deal with, then asked Jisoo to take the car back to the city first. After Jisoo got in the taxi, he immediately drove back. Hyuk patted her shoulder. Sure enough, this girl is Jian. He didn't know why she appeared here. After Jian saw him, she turned around and left, unexpectedly tripping over a box and falling. The two of them went to the beach together to talk. Hyuk asked her what happened and why she didn't return home, but no matter how he asked, she refused to tell her story. At this time, the boss told her not to be lazy. Jian hurriedly ran back and continued her work. Hyuk ran to the boss and asked clearly about Jian's situation. He thought you were a bad person, so he didn't want to reveal it. When he said he was Jian's friend, he believed him. It turned out that every day he went to the mountain to pick medicine, but unexpectedly that day he found a girl lying down. He ran to call the girl and found out she had taken sleeping pills. If you weren't someone who lost the motivation to live, you wouldn't do this. He quickly took Jian to the hospital. But Jian's eyes were lifeless like a dead person. He could only pay her hospital bills and keep her working to pay off her debt, trying to help her give up the idea of suicide. Jian works quietly every day, never complaining before. This made the old man a little scared. At night, he even invited his wife to sleep with her. Hyuk heard the old man's story. He was very sad and touched. He asked him why he thought Jian would commit suicide. The old man said he didn't see her lifeless eyes. The old man said those were not the eyes of someone with hope to live. Hyuk looked at Jian's pitiful appearance and decided to stay by her side. In the evening, he sat by the beach waiting for her to return from work, but Jian did not pay attention to him and even said cold words to chase him away. Hyuk still drove after her until she returned safely. But Jian is still determined to find death. Hyuk took out Dookyung's business card. He coughed that it was because of him that Jian turned out like that. He told Hyuk that when he found Jian, he must immediately contact him. In the end, Hyuk decided not to talk about this with Dookyung. Dookyung could only run to Mr. Seo to ask about the situation. After hearing that Jian had not come home for a long time, he was very disappointed. Remembering that day, I clearly saw her going home, but why didn't she return? He thought she must have witnessed her father being beaten. Because she could not accept the situation, she chose to disappear from this world. Jian was quietly opening the door and jumping over the wall. With only 10 won left in her pocket, she quickly chased the bus. Because she no longer had the motivation to live. When she was about to get in the car, a light stopped her. It turned out that Hyuk had been silently following and watching her. He quickly got out of the car and pulled Jian back, then asked the driver to drive and left. Hyuk said that man was not worthy of her doing that. Jian was bewildered and didn't know how to answer. Two people sat on the side of the road. Jian told Hyuk everything. She hated herself at that time. She regretted it very much. Jian tells Hyuk not to pay attention to her. After speaking, he gave him the towel and then returned home alone. The next day Hyuk also changed into work clothes to work with her. This action made Jian a bit surprised. Her purpose was to make Hyuk stop following her, but it had the opposite effect. Seeing Hyuk like that, Jian felt discouraged and walked away. Dookyung looked thoughtfully at Jian's photo. At this time, the secretary ran in to report that Jian's phone location had been found. He asked his secretary to quickly send him her location, and after saying that, he quickly left. Jian thought a lot while working. In the end, she decided to return to the city with Hyuk. At this time, Dookyung also came to find Jian. With her current outfit, from behind, few people can recognize that she is Jian. Hyuk drives to find Jian. She agreed to go back to the city with him. Dookyung went to where Jian worked, then took out the phone to ask everyone. One person said she had packed her things and was preparing to leave. Then she said that many men came to look for her. They even asked each other who was her boyfriend. Before leaving, the boss gave Jian some money, but she did not want to accept his money. He said this was her salary, then stuffed the money into Jian's hand. She knew he always intentionally kept her here. After hearing it, he was also very surprised. Jian asked him why he helped him. He lifted his sleeve to reveal the scars on his wrists. He said he and Jian are the same. After thanking the couple, Jian got in the car with Hyuk and returned. Dookyung on the way back accidentally saw Hyuk's car. He immediately drove after him and discovered Jian sitting in the car. He rushed to block the car. Then got out of the car and walked towards Jian step by step. He opened the car door and said, "Seo Jian, get off the car quickly." Jian glanced at him. Seeing her sitting still, he pulled her out of the car. He questioned why she could do that. The phone also was not answered. Jian coldly said it had nothing to do with him, then turned around and got into the car. Dookyung quickly pulled her hand back. Hyuk stepped forward and said he would take good care of her, so he could rest assured. Just like that, Jian coldly got into the car, looking like she had never known Dookyung. He watched the car go away. He was very sad. Then he follows behind. Dookyung thought Jian had asked Hyuk to come pick her up, and began to get jealous. I secretly thought that if she had such a good boyfriend, she would have a good life. I feel that Hyuk will definitely take good care of Jian. So when the traffic light turned red, he turned left and left. At this time, Jian's father still did not know that he had cancer. Every day he went everywhere looking for his missing daughter, each time sitting on the side of the road and waiting for a long time. He kept taking out his phone to call her, but there was never a signal. The next day, President Choi came to find him and said he would no longer prosecute him. Thank you for taking care of Jisoo all this time, and tell him to tell Jian that it's all in the past. At this time, Mr. Seo said that Jian was not home yet. This surprised President Choi because she had been missing for a month. When Mr. Seo got out of the elevator, he was seen by Do Kyung. He wondered why Mr. Seo was here. At this point, Mr. Seo was exhausted. The stomach pain caused him agony as he fell to the ground. Do Kyung hurried to help, taking him to the hospital. The doctor said it was due to lack of nutrition and too much pressure that caused him to faint. The secretary informed Do Kyung of the situation and said he did not want to go home but wanted to go to the police station. Do Kyung heard and ran after him to the police station. He was caught asking the police if they had seen the body of any young girl recently. It turned out that after not being able to find Jian for a long time, he thought of the worst case scenario. Seeing that, Do Kyung decided to tell the truth. He went to tell Mr. Seo that he had seen Jian a few days ago and that she was living very well, so he shouldn't worry too much. After hearing this, Mr. Seo was so surprised that he almost fainted. Do Kyung wanted to take him home, but he refused. Then he staggered away, running to the bus station to wait for his daughter. Do Kyung was uneasy and just quietly observed him from afar. Just like that, he sat there for a long time until a taxi came. Saw Mr. Seo getting into the car. Do Kyung then left with peace of mind. Mr. Seo went to Jisoo's bakery alone but was afraid that she wouldn't want to see him, so he had to stand outside and call her. Jisoo hesitated for a while and finally answered the phone. Mr. Seo asked her if Jian might contact her recently and let him know if she had any news. Actually, Mr. Seo told Jisoo like that because he wanted her to feel secure. He walked alone on the road, hoping to meet his daughter. Hyuk led Jian to his rented house. He also found a job for Jian. Do Kyung knew Jian didn't want to see him, so he asked Hyuk for help. Under Hyuk's advice, she went to the cafe to meet Do Kyung. He apologized for not being able to help her at that time, but Jian's reaction was very calm. This attitude of hers made him very confused. Finally, he frankly admitted that he was very worried about her. Jian coldly said everything was no longer important, then she stood up and left. Jian returned to work and finished her work a while later. Then she asked the boss if he had another job. The boss saw that her hands were about to be unbearable, so he told her to go out for a walk. Next time I come back, I will arrange more work for you. Jian listened to his boss and went out for a walk. After walking a while, she suddenly froze because she met someone. She looked forward. This person was her father. He has been looking for her for so long. When she turned to leave, her father suddenly called her back. Lucky, so lucky. You're still alive. Jian looked back at her father. In her mind, she see her father being beaten because of her, having to kneel down and beg for forgiveness. She felt extremely guilty, not having enough courage to face her father. Mr. Seo worriedly asked why she didn't come home. She said she lost her phone. Mr. Seo asked his daughter's recent situation, but Jian said it was all in the past. Dad told her not to suddenly disappear again because it was the adult's fault. Jian begged her father not to speak anymore, it's all in the past. When her father called for Jian to come back, she stubbornly refused. No matter what her father advised, Jian had no way to forgive herself for her mistakes. After that, Jian asked his father not to come and bother him anymore. After speaking, she turned around and left. Looking at his daughters retreating back, Mr. Seo's heart seemed to be strangled. A feeling of despair overwhelmed him. Mr. Seo walked absent-mindedly on the road. These are eyes of despair. When he got home, he took off his coat and folded it neatly, then spread the mattress on the floor and lay down to sleep. When Mrs. Seo returned, she immediately looked at her husband, then at the neatly folded pile of clothes. She sensed that something was unusual but didn't speak out. The next morning, Mr. Seo still didn't wake up. This made her a little worried. She called out to her husband in a low voice but did not see him react. She just thought he was too tired so didn't dare wake him up. Then tell Jitae and his wife about this. Jitae said Dad had only slept one night and there was nothing to worry about. To atone for her crime, Mrs. Seo gave all the money from the store back to President Choi and said she had never touched this money. Hopefully their family won't continue to torment Jian anymore. Chairman Choi said he had negotiated with Mr. Seo 2 days ago. There is no need to do so. After hearing this, Mrs. Seo was extremely surprised. She recounted how Mr. Seo had been sleeping for 2 consecutive days without waking up. Chairman Choi began to empathize with their family. So he personally went to the hospital to ask about the cause of Mr. Seo's deep sleep. The doctor said this is the consciousness of not wanting to wake up. Because she was so miserable, she chose to fall into a deep sleep to escape reality. When Jitae returned from work and still saw his father sleeping, he discovered something unusual. He quickly called his father to wake up, but he still didn't see any movement. Jitae thought his father was sick so he woke him up but he scolded him. Leave me alone. Returning to his room, Jitae started to get angry. He decided to move out tomorrow. But Sunwoo did not agree. This action made Jitae extremely surprised. Sunwoo said moving house only made him more worried. Jitae said he didn't know how to face his parents. Is it good to not have parents? We cannot choose our parents. What will children do when their parents are in prison? Sunwoo's words woke him up. Mrs. Seo asked her husband why he was so angry. He said that Jian was now safe and returned, and after saying that, he lay down to sleep. Today, Jisoo returned from work and discovered that the room was full of branded items. This made her very surprised. She ran to open the clothes prison. She discovered that her clothes were gone, just a pile of branded clothes. She quickly ran down to ask the housekeeper and found out that her mother had asked her to throw away all her things. Jisoo immediately ran out to search, but the trash had been thrown away. She just tried to chase after. Accidentally, she met Do-kyung. She quickly got into the car and told him to quickly drive and chase after her. Do-kyung also followed suit. Not long after the two returned home, Mrs. No asked curiously, why buy so many brand name products but still use cheap products? Jisoo says that's her style. After speaking, she immediately went to her room. A moment later, Jisoo pulled down a pile of designer clothes and jewelry, then asked Dan if he wants them. Mrs. No asked Jisoo to sit down quickly. After she sat down, she immediately said that they were different from others and did not use poor quality products. Jisoo said if she had money, would she be different from other people? Mrs. No became even more angry. Hearing this, Jisoo said that without her consent, her mother went into her room to rummage through her belongings. Is this the etiquette of rich people? Mrs. No remained resolute in her opinion. She even threatened her that if she didn't listen, she would send Mr. Seo and Mrs. Seo to prison. At this time, Chairman Choi also returned from work. Jisoo's emotions officially broke out. She said Mrs. No is not my mother, she is just the person who gave birth to me. Jisoo said without hesitation that in her heart, everyone was just a stranger. This statement was overheard by President Choi and Do-kyung. Mrs. No angrily chased her out of the house. Jisoo frankly said she could go, but she had to buy herself an apartment, which was like a maintenance fee for leaving her alone for the past 25 years. Mrs. No has finally met his match. Buy a house for me, I will go immediately. Mrs. No was angry and did nothing. Returning to her room, Jisoo held the shirt that Mrs. Seo bought for her. When going to university, Mrs. Seo planned to buy each of them a set of clothes. But in order to buy the shirt that Jisoo liked, she stopped buying new clothes for Jian. Only then did she understand Mr. and Mrs. Seo's heart. The next day, Do-kyung was thinking of a way to meet Jian when the secretary came to show him a way. That's an excuse to say that the company's 40th anniversary event went extremely smoothly, so the superiors awarded rewards to those who have contributed. In the evening, Do-kyung waited for Jian to return from work. She stepped forward, saying she and he had no reason to see each other again. Do-kyung quickly took out some money and said this was the company's bonus. Unexpectedly, after Jian received the money, his lie was immediately exposed. 60 million won, minus taxes, would be 58 million won. Do-kyung was confused and didn't know what to say. Jian told him not to cling to her anymore. Do-kyung didn't want Jian to live in pain every day. He told her about Mr. Seo going to the police station to find her. If he hadn't told him, he would probably have traveled around the world looking for his daughter. Shouldn't she be worried about her father? At this moment, Jian knew that it was Do-kyung who told his father to come find him. How dare you do that? Who gives you the right to interfere in my life? Who told you to tell my father where I live? Jian's excitement made Do-kyung a little scared. Jian lost his reason and said that someone like him who was born with a golden spoon in his mouth would never think about other people's things. Who gives you the right to interfere in other people's lives? Do-kyung felt scared for the first time. After this, I don't want to see you anymore. Do-kyung understood Jian's thoughts, so he decided to end this emotional episode. The two passed each other, then they went in different directions. The next morning at dinner, Mrs. No announces that Soare is about to return home. Do-kyung said he had just heard the news. Jisoo expressed curiosity and asked who Soare was. Mrs. No said it was her future sister-in-law. Just like that, under the family's arrangement, Do-kyung and Soare had their first date. The two also got along very well, but Do-kyung suddenly remembered Jian. When she brought Soare home, she asked him about their engagement. But Do-kyung said he didn't need to get engaged and wanted to get married. This answer of his made Soare extremely surprised. The next day, the two went to the ice skating rink together. On the way back, Soare said that Do-kyung already had a girl he loved. Do-kyung was confused and speechless. Soare continued to talk, because today she intentionally failed to test him. But after he caught her, he immediately kept his distance. Do-kyung also didn't know how to answer. Soare says if he doesn't handle this feeling, they can't get married. Do-kyung started to panic. Because only when he marries Soare, he can inherit. Returning home at night, the housekeeper called him back, then gave him Jian's bag, and asked him to help return it to her if he saw Jian. It turns out that on that day, Jian was so scared that she forgot her bag. The next day, he personally returned the bag to her. At the same time, he also said that he could ship it to her, but he still wanted to personally deliver it, because he was about to cut off all ties with her. The two of them said many goodbyes to each other. Looking at Jian's back gradually disappearing, Dukyung's heart felt like it was bleeding. On the way back home, his mind was filled with Jian's image. He couldn't concentrate on driving. At this moment a truck came rushing by. He suddenly remembered the most important person in his life. In his mind, an image of Jian suddenly appeared and the small happiness of being with her. In this moment of life and death, he finally understood his heart. I don't know when Jian became an important person in his heart. He quickly turned the steering wheel and was lucky to escape death. After the car stopped, he realized he couldn't live without Jian. He returned home to see his parents waiting for him. The chairman announced that the two families had decided to host a party for him and Soare next month. After Dukyung determined his feelings, he directly said he did not want to marry Soare, not wanting to accept this loveless marriage. Mrs. No said this was not his decision, because this marriage was related to the survival and development of the company. The next day, he invited Soare out for dinner. He told her that he still loved that girl very much, so I can't marry her as planned. And Soare's attitude is strangely calm, because she also doesn't love Dukyung. They are all family sacrifices. Her parents also informed Jisoo, saying it was time for her to reveal her identity in the company's upcoming activities. She even forced her to dress up as Jian, because several presidents had seen Jian before. To avoid being detected they can only do so. Jisoo had a very difficult time living as Eunsu. At this time, the grandfather also called to advise his granddaughter. Jisoo finally only reluctantly agreed. The next day, she started learning the rituals. The day of the event quickly arrived. Senior leaders have all taken their seats. On this side, Jisoo also dressed up as Jian. Looking at her unfamiliar appearance in the mirror, Jisoo suddenly felt scared of this life. The housekeeper next to her did not forget to remind her when she introduced herself. Just think of it as introducing another woman. On the stage, grandfather was proudly speaking about the glorious history of the corporation. The atmosphere below also begins to heat up. At this time, Jisoo was standing outside the door listening to her grandfather's confident presentation, which made her even more nervous. He announced to everyone that today he will introduce an important person. The butler slowly opened the door. Jisoo was both worried and scared. Jisoo walked step by step towards the door. Why are there so many people coming? Jisoo was confused and didn't know what to do. In the end, she chose to run away. Seeing everyone in the hall bewildered, grandfather said, "The important people I want to introduce today are all of you present here." 10 behavior points. Everyone below happily applauded. Jisoo panicked and ran on the street. Like a lost soul, she quickly took a taxi to her adoptive parents' house. But as soon as she got out of the car, the housekeeper brought someone to take her back. At this moment, Jisoo was extremely scared. Regardless of whether she wanted it or not, they directly dragged her into the car. Her grandfather was furious. No one dared to say a word. At this moment, Jisoo became even more panicked. The person who came down was scolded by his grandfather. Grandfather asked her why she ran away, why she embarrassed the family. He said that as a member of a corporation, making trade-offs is natural, but Jisoo dared to disobey him in front of the crowd. Jisoo cried and explained that she was afraid of becoming Jian's shadow. Her grandfather thought she was looking for an excuse to cover up her weakness. Grandfather was disappointed in Jisoo, so he called Mrs. No quickly took her abroad. At this moment, Jisoo realized that her sister Jian was very miserable living in this family. At night she hid under the blanket and cried. She really wanted to return to her adoptive parents, because there is no love in this house. The next day, Jisoo was getting ready to go to work. She just opened the door and saw Mrs. No stood in front of the door. Jisoo stepped back in fear. Her escape that day had completely angered her. She said that Jisoo is not allowed to leave this room without her orders. Over here, Dukyung found Soare's mother, saying he couldn't marry her daughter, because this is a loveless marriage. Dukyung began to learn Jian's way of living. He tried eating a cup of noodles for 201, but even so, Jian's attitude towards him was still very cold. "I'm back. I have to ask, why did you come back?" Jian didn't pay attention to what he said. After eating the bowl of noodles, he turned around and left. Dukyung kept following her like that. Jian helplessly asked why he did that. "Because I miss you." Jian asks if I will continue to do this forever. "That's right. But I do not like that." Jian thought he was crazy and left directly. Dukyung continued to follow, explaining that what happened before was all a misunderstanding, but even so, Jian cannot forget what happened that night. She even scolded him for being selfish, but Dukyung just laughed. This left her bewildered and incomprehensible. "My personality from that time is back." Dukyung said he had to go to work and see her later. After speaking, he happily left. Today, Dukyung's marriage partner suddenly came to her. She wanted to see what kind of person Jian was that could make Dukyung turn his back on the family. Soare used the excuse of wanting to place an order to talk to Jian. Jian happily agreed to the customer's invitation. Jian asked what kind of lamp she wanted to order. Soare said she wanted to order a pair of lamps for the engagement ceremony. Jian said he would design one for her to look at. Then she took pen and paper and started designing. Soare sat quietly looking at Jian. A moment later the design was born. Soare looked at the drawing and then turned to ask Jian, "Can you engrave the names of the couple for me?" Jian said, "What name?" Jang Soare, Choi Dookyung. At this moment, Jian knew that the other person did not want to order the lamp. Jian says that she and Dookyung have no relationship at all. After she finished speaking, she immediately tore up the design. Soare asked Jian how she felt when she saw her. Did she feel self-conscious? Jian asked Soare why she paid such attention to her. Because she's rich and beautiful, do I have to feel self-conscious in front of her? Then reiterated again that he and Dookyung did not have any relationship. After speaking, she stood up and left, but unexpectedly Soare started following Jian. Jian asks when the engagement will take place. Soare says they have already set a wedding date. When Jian finished listening, the pen in her hand immediately fell down. Soare was invaded by water. She asked Jian to finish it as soon as possible and bring it to Dookyung's office. Jian said there will be delivery staff to bring it, but Soare wanted her to be the one to bring it to prove that she and Dookyung did not have any relationship. Jian had to agree, but she didn't know that Soare was secretly approving of the two of them. It turned out that 2 days ago, Dookyung came to ask her and her to cancel the engagement between their families. Soare happily agreed because she also had someone she liked. This time she came to see if Jian really likes Dookyung. Finally she got the result she wanted. Not long after, the news that Dookyung did not want to marry Soare was quickly conveyed to his grandfather. He guessed he had the girl he loved and immediately called Mrs. No quickly found out who that person was. The next day, when Dookyung returned to the company, he discovered everyone was whispering about something. When he came closer to observe, he realized that he had been demoted to work in another city. Just looking at Dookyung, he immediately guessed that this was his grandfather's trick. Before being transferred, he wanted to see Jian once. On the way to meet Jian, his heart was pounding. Over here, Jian is working enthusiastically. Seeing her extremely happy at this moment, Dookyung arrived and saw the scene, and he also suddenly smiled happily. Suddenly he looked at himself in the rearview mirror and remembered his friend's words. There will be times when you feel tired and miserable, then smile again. Seeing Jian happy, a bold thought suddenly flashed in his mind. After returning to the company, he immediately went to see his parents. He said he wanted to withdraw from the group and did not want to become any heir. Parents widened their eyes in surprise at their son's action. Then Dookyung took out the resignation letter and placed it on the table. After quitting his job at the company, he immediately returned home to pack his luggage. When he got there, he saw his grandfather sitting in the house. He said Dookyung could go but couldn't bring any items. So Dookyung handed over the house key, bank card, and watch. All of his belongings were handed over. At this point, he let Dookyung leave. Dookyung was a bit confused and didn't understand. Then he quickly turned around and left. After leaving the house, Dookyung didn't have a coat on him. He trembled as he walked down the street. But anyway, this is my choice, so he decided to do it until the end. Dookyung used the little money he had left to buy a lot of new clothes. After that, he went to a high-end hotel and rented an expensive room. A person like him who is used to spending lavishly has no idea how difficult the next few days will be. Over here, my grandfather is telling everyone in the house not to allow to help Dookyung, otherwise he would be kicked out of the house. The next day, Dookyung took a car to find his friends for help. When he got off the bus, he conveniently gave the driver 101. After arriving at his friend's company, he hoped the other person could lend him some money, and said that he only had 400,000 won. When his friend heard that, he advised Dookyung to quickly go home and apologize to his family. Dookyung seriously told the other person to stop laughing and quickly bring the money here, but his friend informed him that his grandfather had called everyone to warn him not to help him. Goodbye friends and friends. Remember to come home early. Dookyung had no choice but to go to Jian's workplace. He wanted to go inside but was afraid she would find out about him leaving home. When he turned to leave, he saw Jian. Seeing him, she remembered F Corporation's announcement. She thought he came to say goodbye to her, so she offered to invite him to lunch. After hearing this, Dookyung was extremely surprised. Jian said he had to go put his things away first. While waiting for Jian, Dookyung thought about where to eat later. When Jian comes back, Dookyung suggests going to the sidewalk to eat. Jian was surprised. He suggested taking the bus together. Jian couldn't believe his ears. Dookyung said today he wanted to experience the feeling of sitting on a bus. Dookyung feels everything around is very new. Then the two went to a roadside restaurant. Seeing Dookyung, who is usually such a picky eater, Jian is very suspicious. Then the two went to the bus station to say goodbye. Dookyung watched Jian's back gradually disappear. There was some regret in his heart. In the car, Jian remembered that Dookyung was about to move to another city. Tears fell from her eyes. Dookyung calls his secretary to ask about his grandfather's situation. At this moment he knew he had implicated the secretary, causing him to be sent to work at a small company. Dookyung runs to a motel. Seeing that there was not much money left in his pocket, he had to run to the secretary's house. The secretary was waiting for him at the gate, because he knows how much Dookyung is a person who values face. When he arrived at his house, the secretary's mother enthusiastically welcomed him. Looking at the cramped room, Dookyung now knows that living for the secretary's family is not easy. At night, Dookyung couldn't sleep. The next morning, the secretary's mother waited at the door early. As soon as she heard the noise, she immediately brought in food. Looking at the nutritious breakfast, he looked up at the cramped room. Do-kyung decides that the day he returns, he will increase the secretary's salary. He accidentally saw his secretary's mother eating his leftovers. In order not to affect the secretary's family, he left half of the money he had. Then he left the secretary's house with 200,000 won to make money. Do-kyung went to the gym to work out. Just like that, Do-kyung experienced hard manual work for the first time. Wiping chairs, picking up trash, cleaning windows, working non-stop. He was tired and couldn't breathe. At the end of a working day, Do-kyung only had a total of 700,000 won. It's not even equal to a meal I had before. Jian is eating with her colleagues. Looking at the bowl of kimchi and tofu soup, she remembered Do-kyung. On the way home, Jian told Hyuk about Do-kyung leaving. Do-kyung's image suddenly filled his mind. Thank you for going up the mountain to find me. But I remember the distance between the two people's identities. Jian said out loud that she didn't want to see Do-kyung again, but she couldn't help but burst into tears. But when Jian arrived home, she discovered Do-kyung sitting in the living room waving to her. Looking at Jian's surprised expression, the innkeeper said that in the coming days they would stay with Do-kyung. It turned out that Do-kyung had finished eating dinner and had nowhere else to go. He just had to go to Jian's place. Here, Do-kyung accidentally learns that Jian and Hyuk live in the same boarding house. Coincidentally, the landlord was his former best friend. After talking for a while, Do-kyung told the homeowner everything. Do-kyung will share a room with Hyuk. Why are you sleeping in my bed? After all, it's the homeowner's bed, not yours. A while later, Jian called Do-kyung out to talk. She asked him to stop joking. At this time, Do-kyung also said everything. He wants to be independent, wants to grow with his own hands, wants Jian to witness how he makes a career. The next morning, Do-kyung got on the bus and went to the gym to work. Even when a customer threw a towel in his face, he still had to restrain himself. After returning home after a day of work, Do-kyung paid the landlord for the room. Then he borrowed a computer to go online to look for a job. Jian in the room heard everything. She ran out and asked why he had to find a part-time job. Because there is no money. Do you really only have 400,000 won? Do-kyung said that minus the rent and computer loan, he had 30,000 won left. Are you enjoying the role of the poor? At the delivery warehouse, everyone talked loudly. Only Do-kyung is an elegant and polite eater. The first time Do-kyung worked as a porter at a delivery warehouse, people scolded him for being stupid. He put heavy things down, light things went up. Do-kyung was a little uncomfortable. After all, I am the president's son, no one has ever dared to talk to me like that before. But for the sake of life, Do-kyung just had to continue delivering goods. The next morning, Jisoo hid from her family, brought him essential items, and even brought him 100 million. Do-kyung wanted to prove himself, so he refused to accept the money his sister brought. Then he hurriedly ran to work. In the evening, he sat alone at a convenience store eating rice balls. Do-kyung's parents are also eating steak at a luxury restaurant. Without Do-kyung's presence, everyone ate in a sad mood. While Do-kyung was chasing the bus, he accidentally tripped and fell. Han was also injured. Luckily the car stopped at the stop. Do-kyung was able to get on the bus. But the smell of sweat on his body made everyone around him uncomfortable. Do-kyung shyly pulled his shirt to prevent the smell of sweat from spreading. When everyone returns, they encounter Do-kyung at the door. He waved goodbye to everyone and hurried inside. Jian looked at his dirty appearance and felt very sad. Returning to the room, Do-kyung quickly washed the clothes. He discovered that he didn't know how to use a shock machine. Jian looked through the glass window and saw the bruise on his neck and was very sad. She went to teach him how to use the shock machine. She advised him to return home quickly. But before she could say anything, he bluntly rejected her. At the same time, he also told me the reason why I couldn't go home. Jian was helpless. Today is Jian's birthday. She sat and talked with her friends. Do-kyung returns from work and learns that today is Jian's birthday. So he personally went to the kitchen, looked at the recipe on his phone and cooked her a bowl of seaweed soup. The wound on his hand touched the water, and he only dared to let out a small cry. Then he started slicing the beef. He almost fell asleep. 5 minutes later the delicious pot of seaweed soup is ready. He was also surprised by his cooking skills. Then he cut the spam meat again. At this time, Do-kyung also felt hungry, so he ate a small piece. When Jian returned, she discovered that there was a small tray of rice on the table. The roommate came over and said this was all made for her by Do-kyung. Jian was surprised and couldn't believe it. The other person continued to say that even though Do-kyung's hand was injured, he still went to the kitchen to cook rice for 2 hours. Only then did she remember the bruise on Do-kyung's neck. Jian understood everything. She hurriedly ran to find Do-kyung. He was waiting for the bus to get ready to go to work. This scene made Jian extremely sad. She ran to see the wound on his hand and asked what happened. Do-kyung opened his hand. Inside was the birthday gift he prepared for her. Jian now knew that he was working part-time to earn money to buy gifts for herself. It turns out that Dookyung always remembers Jian's birthday. A few days ago on the way to work I saw a very beautiful necklace, but the price was too expensive. He just had to work to make money from morning until late at night. Jian heartbrokenly turned around and left. Dookyung quickly ran after her. Jian immediately told him to quickly return to his original life and not suffer so much because of her. Dookyung asks, "Do you like me too?" "That's right. I like you." After knowing that Jian also liked him, he suddenly became happy like a child. When eating, he must also eat with her. When applying medicine, you must ask Jian to apply it for you. Even when washing dishes, I have to have Jian standing next to me. The next morning, when Jian was getting ready to go to work, Dookyung was waiting for her on the stairs early. At the same time, he borrowed 200,000 won from her to register the company. Jian withdrew 400,000 won and gave it to him, but Dookyung didn't need that much. He gave her the change again. When Jian walked out the door, she suddenly saw Dookyung following her. He explained that the company he came to register was on the same route as her to work. Dookyung, after taking Jian to work, also prepared to leave. Jian suddenly saw that Dookyung's tie was askew. Jian helplessly walked to the side. "You have important things to do today." After finishing work, Jian went to work, leaving Dookyung immersed in happiness. After a busy day, he finally registered the company name, followed by expanding his business. Even though security stopped him, he still gave business cards to investors. At night, he ran back to his part-time job. Early the next morning, grandfather went to Dookyung's house. He affirmed that Dookyung was determined to give up the engagement because he already had someone he liked. He told the butler to get the dashcam from Dookyung's car. But when the housekeeper got into the car, he couldn't find the memory card. Grandfather felt that this grandson was also wise. He didn't expect Chairman Choi to take one step ahead. He feels that the departure of Dookyung is all because of that girl. Mrs. No found her son's secretary, but the secretary said that after Dookyung left, the two had never contacted each other. This made her even more suspicious. Suddenly she saw the owner of the bakery that Jisoo was working at and remembered seeing her hiding in her room crying before. She guessed that Jisoo and he were in love, so she went to Jisoo's workplace. Coincidentally, 3 people walked out together. After everyone left, Jisoo asked her mother why she came here. Mrs. No lied that she came to visit her, but Jisoo definitely didn't believe it. After leaving Jisoo's bakery, she did not forget to return with a bag of cakes. On the way home, she accidentally saw Jian. Seeing Mrs. No, Jian hastily retreated. Mrs. No showed concern and asked Jian. Suddenly remembering that Jian was not his daughter, he immediately changed his expression. "How can she live like this? Wouldn't it be better to go to your mother's store to work?" At this time, Jian learned that her mother had not returned the store. Mrs. No told her to find a good job and do it. Because of Jisoo, they won't make things difficult for her family in the future. After speaking, she got in the car and left. She ran to a corner gasping for breath. She was still scared to face Mrs. No and their family. Coming home, Mrs. No is very saddened because her son has left home. She recalls that recently Dookyung only went to the company. Moreover, he was busy organizing the company's event. During that time, only Jian was by Dookyung's side. Thinking about this, Mrs. No can also guess a bit. After discovering everything, Mrs. No went to Jian's house. Mr. Seo was scared by this sudden appearance, afraid she would harm Jian again. After a while of questioning, she learned that Jian had not returned home yet. The next day, through investigation, she found Jian's friend's coffee shop. She lied that she had something to look for Jian, so her best friend called to inform Jian. After hearing the news, she decided she couldn't keep hiding like this, and finally agreed to go to the coffee shop to meet Mrs. No. As soon as she opened her mouth, she asked Jian why she seduced her son. "Do you want to rely on Dookyung to enter the tycoon?" Just as Jian was about to explain, she interrupted her, saying it was all her family's plot. Faced with Mrs. No's unreasonable accusations, Jian decided not to give in anymore. She frankly said that she and Dookyung do not have any relationship at all. As for why he left home, she should find her son and ask him clearly, not come to her to question her. This action surprised Mrs. No. No one had dared to do that to her before. Jian continued to explain that she never thought she would return to work in that company, because the life of a tycoon family makes her feel extremely disgusted. After hearing this, Mrs. No didn't know what to say. From this moment, Jian was no longer afraid when facing her. Their conversation made the girl next to them tremble in fear. After Mrs. No left, Jian stood unsteadily, staggering. She didn't know why Jian appeared so strong. After returning to the company, she immediately told her husband about this, but he was not worried at all. He even said he believed what Jian said. Mrs. No was bewildered and did not understand. President Choi said Jian will definitely find a way to make Dookyung return home. But Mrs. No refused to believe it. Over here, Jian's invited Hyuk out to talk, then told him about Jian's story. Hyuk knew that Mrs. No was a person who stopped at nothing. He was afraid that Jian would get hurt again, so he told Dookyung this story. Dookyung ran to find Jian. He asked her why she didn't let him know when his mother came to see her. Jian also knew that Dookyung was worried, so she immediately said she didn't want to affect his plans. Kyung told her not to worry too much, wait until he has a stable career and will be strong enough to fight his family. The next day, to prevent family members from hurting Jian, Kyung took the initiative to go home. He told his mother that his feelings for Jian were just unrequited love. Please stop making things difficult for her. What I do has nothing to do with Jian. Would you have done this without Jian? Mrs. No blames her son for giving up everything for a girl. Is it worth it? Then recount Jian's words that she did not want to enter the world of tycoons. I also don't want to develop any feelings for Kyung. Although Kyung was surprised, he still didn't believe it. He declared that he wanted to live the life he wanted. Then he got up to leave. Ask her if what she said is true. There really isn't any relationship between her and him. Jian immediately admitted. Kyung said that he ran away from home and that he planned to start a career all because of her. Jian said again that she liked him, but the two of them were two parallel lines that could never be together. Kyung tries to convince Jian, but she directly expresses her attitude. She said she would never step foot into a tycoon family. Then she immediately stood up and left, leaving Kyung alone. And lost, Jian walked out. She silently looked towards Kyung. Her eyes were wet with tears. She did all this just so Kyung would return to her original life. At the same time, fulfilling her promise to President Choi, she will try to convince him to return to the company. In the evening, Kyung met Jian again. He said that if she really thought that family was the biggest obstacle between the two of them, then he wouldn't bother her anymore in the future. In order for Kyung to return home soon and not have to continue suffering beside her, Jian nodded in recognition. Kyung was completely disappointed. Let's finish. Mr. Seo did not know he had cancer. He had excruciating stomach pain and even repeatedly vomited blood. He finally learned that he had cancer like his mother did. Thinking about what his children would do when he passed away, he suddenly burst into laughter. Because he had previously bought insurance, if he died, his children would receive a huge sum of money. It seems like you felt somewhat comforted. He quietly looked up at the sky, thanking God for helping my children have a better life. On the way home, I thought I only had 2 months left to live. He looked at his face through the glass window. He decided to live for himself in these last days of his life. He dyed his hair and went to the mall to buy new clothes. This hairstyle and way of dressing makes him look 10 years younger. Mrs. Seo was happy to see her husband dye his hair and buy clothes. Mr. Seo said he would not move house for now, then went into the room. Mrs. Seo found it strange that her husband was happy. The next morning, Mr. Seo sat in front of the mirror and combed his hair. After that, he even applied moisturizer. Mrs. Seo was very suspicious. When his wife left, he opened the wardrobe and took out a suitcase. He took out the insurance contract and dressed neatly. Mom, I'm about to see you again. I will listen to your mother. I'm very happy now. If you die of illness, your daughter will no longer feel guilty. In the evening he went to the guitar shop. After a moment of hesitation, he also entered. Mrs. Seo was waiting for him with the dining table. She also looked back at her children's childhood photos. At this time, Mr. Seo returned with a guitar in his hand, and she asked why he came home late. I have cooked. Mr. Seo said his children had not returned yet. He also asked why cook for someone who won't come back. He didn't know that Mrs. Seo was always tormenting herself. In the evening, Mr. Seo's stomach pain came. He jumped up and ran to the bathroom. Only then did Mrs. Seo know the stranger. She hurried over to inquire, worried that her husband might have eaten contaminated food last night. The next morning, he went up the mountain to find a house. He wanted to spend the rest of his life here. Mr. Seo also wrote his last words on the wall. Then he went home and packed his things. He suddenly felt dizzy and fell to the ground. Jian receives a phone call from the hospital. Hearing the news, she immediately ran to the hospital. Her father is refusing to take the test. The doctor said he kept vomiting blood in the car. Jian was extremely scared, but her father said it was okay. Jian asked to do a test for her father. Mrs. Seo also rushed over. It was only then that Mr. Seo agreed to undergo testing. Everyone was anxiously waiting. After a while, the doctor finished the examination. The doctor requested him to be admitted to the hospital immediately, but he refused and insisted on going back home. When he returned home, Jian asked her father where he intended to go. He said he wanted to go out to further his business knowledge. Jite returned. He exposed his father's lies. In the end, Mr. Seo finally revealed the truth that he had stomach cancer. He wanted to find a place to die. The whole family was confused and didn't know what to do. In the evening, Jian stayed at home for one night. She was extremely sad. Jite and Mrs. Seo both cried. She thought it was all her fault. In the middle of the night, Mr. Seo silently left his will and left. The next morning, the scream woke Jian up. Knowing that his father had left, Jian quickly got in the bus to find him. Mr. Seo, who had arrived at the house in the mountains. He wanted to die here. He played the guitar in his free time, and his stomach ached. It has a stomach ache, take medicine. He doesn't want to involve his children. The whole family is waiting for test results. Everyone is scared. After a while, the results came back. Mr. Seo did not have cancer. The doctor said this cancer was just in his imagination. Because he doesn't want to live. Jian ran out crying after hearing it. She remembers everything Mr. Seo told her. You can't choose how to live, but you can choose how to die. Jian thinks it's her fault. The whole family returned but could not contact his father. Mr. Seo was writing down his unfulfilled wishes. Mrs. Seo was extremely sad. She suddenly remembered that a phone number had called Mr. Seo. She told her son to come tomorrow to check. Mr. Seo, who is preparing breakfast. Dad, Jiho and Jian come over. It turns out the two of them found out through the neighborhood committee. Jian told Dad, do you think you can escape? Mr. Seo was very surprised because his children had found him. The two of them helped Mr. Seo clean up, then left. Mr. Seo did not know what his children were planning to do. It turned out that before that, the three brothers had discussed with each other what they were doing. What we need to do is to make him understand that he is very important. That's why they didn't advise him to return home. Even if Dukyung screamed, Jian didn't pay attention to him. Returning to the room, Jian was in tears again. Dukyung frantically ran. Jian said they couldn't be together. Dukyung collapsed exhausted. He doesn't understand why Jian did that. Could it be because he is the son of a tycoon? At this time, Jian was at home when she saw Dukyung returning in an exhausted state. That night, she couldn't sleep. She brought water and medicine and placed it in front of the room door. Then she called him out to get the medicine. After a while, she saw that nothing had changed. Jian worriedly stood close to the door, listening for Dukyung's movements. Hearing Dukyung talking in his sleep, she pushed the door open and walked in. Seeing he had a high fever, she worriedly called him up. She carefully wiped his sweat and helped him take medicine. In a coma, Dukyung repeatedly said he loved Jian. Jian looked at Dukyung heartbroken. Although she loved him very much, she couldn't let tragedy happen again. Jian gently kissed him. Afterwards, she quietly walked out of the room. And this scene was witnessed by their housemate. The next day, Jian cooked porridge for Dukyung. When Hyuk asked her why she cooked porridge today, she said her stomach was a bit upset. Dukyung, after a night of being with Jian, he finally regained consciousness and moved freely. When Jian and Hyuk were about to go to work, Dukyung suddenly walked out. Seeing the two of them standing next to each other, he turned around and left. Seeing Dukyung didn't remember what happened last night, Jian breathed a sigh of relief. After a while, Dukyung finished personal hygiene and got ready to go to work. Roommate asked him why he hadn't eaten porridge yet but had already left. Roommate said this was porridge Jian cooks for everyone to eat. Hearing the porridge Jian cooked, Dukyung immediately sat down to eat. At this time, the secretary suddenly called Dukyung and the secretary made an appointment to meet this afternoon. The homeowner asked in confusion, "Why do you have to go out to work to make money? Aren't you about to go home?" Dukyung said that your grandfather has blocked all investment projects. The purpose is to want he to return to the company to work. I don't want to be a chess piece in his hand. So even if he broke up with Jian, he would not return to that house. In the afternoon, he went to the cafe to meet the secretary. The secretary announced that he wanted to resign because the place he was sent to work was too far from the city. Dukyung immediately understood that his grandfather did not want the secretary to help him, so he did that. The secretary knew that Dukyung had no money right now, so he asked Dukyung to work with him to make money. The main job is transporting ice. People who know how to work here would freeze to death. The secretary said that even though it's cold, they make a lot of money. Because in order to make money, Dukyung continuing this job. Jisoo came found Jiho and pretended to be her boyfriend to annoy Hyuk, and used money to bribe Jiho. The two of them were walking on the street. Seeing Hyuk, they immediately excitedly walked towards him. Jisoo and Jiho pretended to go over to say hello. But before he could do anything, it was revealed. Hyuk quickly pulled Jisoo's hand back, saying there was something that needed to be resolved with her. Hyuk pulled her to a nearby coffee shop. Jisoo ducked like a child who had just made a mistake. Under Hyuk's questioning, she finally said that the reason she was avoiding him was because she knew he already had someone he liked. Hyuk decided to speak his heart out. He admitted that girl was his first love, because she had been through a lot, mistaking that anxiety for love. Until Jisoo appeared, the person who made him flutter was not the girl. That was Jisoo. When the male god confessed to her, Jisoo finally smiled. On this side, Dukyung still couldn't understand. Clearly Jian also liked him, but why didn't she accept the love? Remember what Hyuk said before, Jian just found herself. If you really care about her, then don't bother her anymore. Remember what Jian said, she had crossed the line between life and death. So early the next morning, he borrowed the secretary's car and decided to go to the place where Jian had happened. He went to the house of the old man who helped Jian. The old man initially did not trust Do-kyung. But through Do-kyung's sincere conversation, he told him the story of Jian trying to commit suicide. Do-kyung finally knew the reason why Jian did not accept his feelings. He also understood that his family had brought deep hurt to her. Recalling Jian's face that day, he felt extremely self-blame, blaming himself for not being able to care for her more, for causing her to fall into a tragedy. Do-kyung went to her workplace in pain. He quietly stood and watched her and Hyuk happily together. He also did not step forward to break the happy atmosphere. Waiting for Hyuk to leave, Do-kyung found Jian. He wanted to hug her once. Jian thought something had happened to him, so she didn't protest. Do-kyung gently patted Jian's head, saying he had gone to see the old man who saved her. Do-kyung said with tears in his eyes. Before having a free life, he would not force Jian to stay by his side. After Do-kyung left, Jian cried in pain. She loved him, but that love could not overcome the distance between their identities. The next morning, the two accidentally met, but then passed by as if they had known each other. Even when working, they were just like normal colleagues. The next day, the homeowner invited everyone to the house to gather to eat and drink. Do-kyung's grandfather suddenly entered. His appearance made Do-kyung and Jian extremely frightened. As soon as they arrived, they ordered everyone please stay away for a bit. Everyone quickly packed up their things and moved upstairs. Do-kyung quickly explained that he and Jian had no relationship at all, but Chairman No did not pay attention to what he said. He asked everyone to sit down and talk. Then he directly asked Jian that she was not interested in our group, but that Do-kyung was always clinging to her, right? She said they were both over and she will move out at the end of this month. Grandfather said she doesn't need to move anywhere, just stay here. Jian knows he is intentionally insulting her, but because she thinks about Do-kyung, she doesn't dare to explain. Grandfather told quickly make a sales contract. The homeowner firmly refused to sell. Seeing that, he pulled out a large amount of money and threw it on the table, saying he would pay 10 times the value of the house. The homeowner saw Jian's tense and scared appearance and decided to reveal his identity. Let me introduce myself a bit, President No Yan-ho. I am Chairman Lee's nephew, Lee Kong-ji. After hearing this, Chairman No was extremely surprised. He did not dare to offend the homeowner, so he could only take his secretary and leave. Jian, in order to vent her frustrations, ran to the side of the road to play a game of whack-a-mole. At this time, Do-kyung also came over without saying a word but holding a hammer to beat the mouse. How could you do that to Jian? So Jian will definitely hate me. Jisoo is being forced by her mother to study abroad. Before leaving, she wanted to say goodbye to her adoptive parents. In the evening, Jisoo sleeps with his foster parents. Jian, Do-kyung and Hyuk received the news and immediately ran to the airport to hold Jisoo. Jian drives the delivery truck, Do-kyung borrows the secretary's car, Hyuk drove his SU-5 car quickly to the airport, and the three of them chased after Jisoo's car. On the way, Jian told Do-kyung about Jisoo and Hyuk meeting. When Do-kyung heard the news, he couldn't help but be surprised. At this time, Jisoo in the car quietly shed tears. Mrs. No next to comfort her. I will go there to visit you in a while. At this time, Jisoo borrowed her mother's phone to call her brother Do-kyung, asking him to convey to Jian that he was sorry to her. If time could go back, she would never return to her parents' house in this life. After hearing this, Mrs. No got angry and took the phone. Do-kyung was worried about his sister, so he quickly drove to Chase. Inform everyone that Jisoo hasn't arrived at the airport yet. At this time, Hyuk suddenly accelerated and told everyone to hurry up. The three of them rushed down the road. When suddenly Do-kyung saw his mother's car, he immediately informed Jian. When Hyuk received the news, he immediately chased after her. The driver discovered someone was following him. The secretary looked through the rearview mirror and immediately recognized Jian. Mrs. No told the driver to speed up. Jisoo also began to panic. They prepared to force Jisoo's car to stop. Watching a romantic movie but thinking it looked like an action movie, Jisoo turned around to find her sister Jian driving behind. Jian looked at her sister, then accelerated and pushed the car in front of her. All four cars immediately stopped. Jisoo didn't believe her eyes. At this time, Hyuk walked down. Jisoo followed him. So she also decided to leave home to follow her lover, and Jian is one of the people helping them. At this time, Mrs. No saw another person. That person was Do-kyung. But when he was preparing to leave, the car suddenly broke down. At this time the police also arrived at the scene. Just like that, the two people were arrested and taken to the police station. The mother actually called the police to arrest her son. Do-kyung lies that she dropped something on her mother's car. Jian said that because she scratched her car, she chased him all the way. Faced with the two people's explanation, the police were extremely helpless. But in the end, there was no evidence, so they had to release the two people. They reminisce about the past together. It was Jian who crashed into the back of Dukyung's car. At this time, the two people started their relationship. The two happily remembered the situation at that time, not knowing that the mother in the car saw everything. The two of them are still reviewing the past. On this side, Hyuk and Jisoo have hidden in a safe place. Jisoo was worried that her mother would put Hyuk at a disadvantage, so she asked Hyuk to take her back. Hyuk knew what Jisoo was worried about, so he told her not to be afraid. He was here. Mrs. No sent a group of guards to surround her adoptive parents' house and the bakery where Jisoo worked part-time. Even the house that Jisoo and Hyuk are renting. But the homeowner has a great family background, so she can't do anything. He immediately calls the police to report. The guards saw that the situation was not good and just walked away. At this time, Hyuk brought Jisoo back. The homeowner immediately winked at Hyuk. Hyuk immediately understood and quickly brought Jisoo into the house. Jisoo was so scared that she fell down. She felt like everything was in a dream. Jian and Dukyung also arrived. After Jisoo saw them, he hugged Jian tightly. After everyone calmed down, Jisoo said it was because her mother threatened her. If she doesn't go abroad, Hyuk and her entire adoptive family will lose their jobs. She had no other choice, so she agreed. Hyuk saw that Jisoo was a bit tired, so he asked Jian to take Jisoo upstairs to rest. Dukyung asked Hyuk what he wanted to do. I just like Jian and now I like Jisoo. The two returned to the room and had a heart-to-heart. The two eventually resolved the misunderstanding and returned to their previous relationship. To prevent Mrs. No from making things difficult for Jisoo, Dukyung decided to go home. As soon as he walked out the door, Jian immediately ran after him. She didn't have the heart to leave Dukyung alone to be scolded, so she decided to go with him to explain the reason. Mrs. No immediately told Jian to get out. This Jian looks like a child who did something wrong. Luckily, under President Choi's advice, she reluctantly let Jian sit down. But before Jian could explain a few sentences, Mrs. No let out insulting words about Jian. When Dukyung tries to defend Jian, Mrs. No gets angry. Mr. Choi has been married for 25 years. Every day, he lives very modestly. Faced with his father-in-law's anger, he had no choice but to endure and not dare to speak up. He had just learned that his wife, Mrs. No, had always been forcing her daughter. For the sake of his daughter's happiness, he decided that he would no longer be patient and would reveal the secret from 25 years ago. While you were having an affair and lost your daughter, now you dare to force her again? Mrs. No was extremely surprised. After being surprised, she made many excuses. So Mr. Choi has revealed the truth about what happened back then. At that moment, upon receiving the letter, he immediately suspected it was sent by human traffickers. He told Mrs. No about it, but she denied it. He became completely suspicious of Mrs. No. The next day when Mrs. No went to meet the traffickers, he immediately followed. After Mrs. No left, he gave the guards some money and learned the truth that year. That year, when she stole a diamond hairpin, she unexpectedly drove away in panic. Mr. Choi blamed her for doing something shameful. That was why she ran away in such a panic. Mr. Choi angrily said they dumped Jisoo in a remote, deserted place. He investigated himself and found out that the location had been raining heavily all day, which meant that Jisoo had been in the rain all day. Having finished speaking, he threw away a photo of the location at that time. Mrs. No looked vaguely at the photos. The chairman continued to say, that night, if it weren't for Mr. and Mrs. Seo, Jisoo would no longer be alive. Mrs. No was so surprised that she couldn't speak. Mr. Choi said he could forget what she did in the past, but in the future, he absolutely should not look into Jisoo's affairs anymore, because you harmed her once. Mrs. No could only helplessly agree. Waiting for Mr. Choi to leave, she sat down like a lost soul. Actually, she didn't have a physical affair, just a mental affair. At this point, Jisoo is still worried that her mother will come to take her away. Suddenly, her father calls, arranging to meet Jisoo. Mr. Choi says that he has settled everything and that she doesn't need to go back home anymore. Jisoo can also stay at the bakery. Jisoo was very happy. He feels very guilty towards Jisoo. Jisoo immediately ran to where Hyuk worked and told him this. The two happily hugged each other. Mr. Choi saw all of this. Seeing them so happy, he knew that everything he did was worth it. When Mr. Choi arrived home, Mrs. No told him she had returned the restaurant to Mrs. Seo. She says that since they got married, he hasn't cared about her anymore. He married her just for the money. Mr. Choi coldly walks away. Jian has also moved back home. Now everything is starting to get better. Dukyung returns home and sees Jisoo and Hyuk sitting in the living room. Unexpectedly, Dukyung immediately ordered them not to be together in the middle of the night anymore. You're worse than your dad. Dukyung immediately pushed the two apart and went back to the bedroom. When everyone felt like things were getting better, Mr. Seo, who had an anxiety disorder, received a text message from his daughter. He immediately went home from the mountain, but the evil chairman No felt that the reason his grandson didn't want to go home was definitely because of Jian. So he was very angry and went to Mr. and Mrs. Seo's house. He sat down directly on the chair and let Mr. and Mrs. Seo stand and talk to him. Mr. Seo asked him what he came for. Chairman No says that Jian wants to marry into their family. Mr. Seo asks Jian why she said that. Knowing Jian didn't say that, Mr. Seo always understood his daughter. So he said Jian would absolutely not seduce his grandchild. Chairman No gets angry, stands up, and slaps Mr. Seo. Then he raised his hand and prepared to slap again, but he accidentally hits Mrs. Seo instead. Mr. Seo knows that what happened back then was his fault, so he can only endure it. Chairman No threatens to make Mr. Seo's family's life worse than death. He also tells Mrs. Seo to tell Jian. Then he leaves the house. At this time, Jian received a phone call from her father, telling her to remember to come home early at night. After that, Jian immediately brought the remaining items home. Do-kyung, because he wanted to stay with Jian a little longer, lied that his car broke down. So the two people had to take the bus home. At this time, they were all a little shy and wanted to talk but didn't know what to talk about. Suddenly the driver braked suddenly. Both of them were very happy enjoying this moment. After getting off the bus, they went to the convenience store to drink beer. After drinking beer, the two of them drank coffee again. Do-kyung looked at the empty coffee cup. He just wished that this coffee cup was still full, so he could stay with Jian longer. Seeing that, the landlady immediately gives them snacks as a gift. Then finish eating and go. Just like that, the two of them have a reason to stay together. They quickly finished eating, and in the meantime they drank 2 more bottles of water. But both of them didn't want to say goodbye and just stood there stupidly. There is no party in this world that doesn't end. The two still have to walk the path home. It's just that every step they take is very slow. No matter how slow, Jian finally arrives at the door. Do-kyung asks Jian if he knows why he didn't keep her. Jian just looked at him without saying anything. Do-kyung said she always smiled uncomfortably in front of him. The girl in front of Hyuk also smiled. In front of everyone, she smiled happily. Happy like Seo Jian, but in front of her brothers, she doesn't smile. She loves Do-kyung but she cannot let go of the problems with his family. Do-kyung also knows Jian's difficulties. Goodbye Seo Jian, but the moment he turned away, tears kept falling uncontrollably. Jian watched Do-kyung's back leave. Right now she really wanted to run back and hug him and tell him that she loved him very much, but she couldn't. Entering the house, Mrs. Seo wanted to tell her husband to absolutely not mention that she was beaten to Jian today. Jian was happy to see his father again, then she started arranging her things. At this time, Mr. Seo entered the room. He asks Jian and Do-kyung what their relationship is. Mr. Seo saw his daughter understand this and it was truly heartbreaking. The next day when Jisoo and Hyuk were going to work together, the bodyguard that Mrs. No said always followed them. Dan and Jihan are setting up a small stall on the side of the road. She was so cold that she was shivering. Jihan saw her dressed like that and immediately said, "Why are you wearing so little and not wearing that jacket?" Dan went to the clothes rack and took off her coat. The customer immediately asked her how much this shirt costs. Dan quickly said 50,000 won also included earrings. Jihan also saw the scene. Just like that, the customer bought that jacket. Two people proactively went out and stood up to sell. At this time, the customer asked if the two of them were a couple. "No, she's just my collaborator." Dan looked at him with jealous eyes. Under the coordination of the two people, the clothes were sold out. Jihan then took part of the money and gave it to Dan. Dan looked at the money and immediately laughed. Suddenly, Jihan grabbed her hand. Dan is a bit shaken now. Jihan then goes a step further and says this is part of the job. Dan looked at Jihan. At this moment her heart was pounding again. The next day Jihan displayed his goods again, but without Dan, he couldn't sell any. This made him very depressed. Right now Dan has arrived. She was really shaken. Dan is scolding Jihan for not contacting her for several days. Suddenly she received a phone call from Do-kyung. Dan told him that his grandfather had come to Jian's house. Do-kyung was extremely surprised after hearing this. He absolutely will not allow anyone to rape Jian anymore, so he hurriedly went to his grandfather's house. But no matter what Do-kyung advised, his grandfather always thought it was Jian's fault. "I have to teach her a lesson. These things were all caused by you leaving home." At this time, Do-kyung was finally angry. He did not allow anyone to rape Jian even if it was his grandfather. "Seo Jian, I won't let her enter the door of this house." Chairman No was extremely surprised. Do-kyung once again made his attitude clear. Even if he had nothing to eat, he would not return to this house. "Are you challenging me? I am also not your obedient servant. But in exchange, the price we have to pay is that our grandfather's business, which was already improving a bit, was hindered." Do-kyung feels very uncomfortable drinking alcohol alone to relieve his sadness. Jian also learned from Hyuk that Chairman No had destroyed Do-kyung's business. This makes Jian feel very sad for Do-kyung. Do-kyung was drunk alone, so when he got home he lay down on the floor to sleep. And Jian couldn't sleep all night, so she stayed up all night to help Do-kyung search. She silently helps Do-kyung restart his business. The next day, she went to Kang-ji and asked him to help her bring these documents to Do-kyung. Furthermore, don't let Kang-ji tell Do-kyung that this was her own doing. But he didn't. He told Do-kyung that this document was made by Jian, and said that this was because Jian stayed up all night to do it. Du Kyung picked up the document and said nothing. And Kangji also decided to help him start his business again. The next day, Du Kyung immediately went to the carpentry workshop. He told everyone that if there is any leftover wood, absolutely do not throw it away, remember to leave it for him. He expressed his thanks then immediately left without looking at Jian once, making Jian very suspicious of how he could use her plan and even make a decision so early. She was a little suspicious, so she chased Du Kyung to take a look. She saw Du Kyung standing waiting for her. It turned out that he knew that Jian would definitely come out to find him. Jian touched her milk. Du Kyung asked her where she wanted to go. Jian lied to him and said he had to find Kangji, but Du Kyung said it was okay to find him. Unexpectedly, Du Kyung asked her if she wanted to marry him. He said he wouldn't marry her. Jian looked at him with a confused expression. I told you I don't want to marry you, but I want to date you. So we're just dating, not getting married, Jian. I agree, just dating. Du Kyung laughed, then he drove to the construction site to check the machinery and equipment when he discovered someone was following him. He guessed this must be my grandfather's person coming. Du Kyung immediately drove in another direction. After getting out of the car, Du Kyung immediately pulled the follower out without saying a word and directly punched him. At the same time, he asked him to tell his grandfather about this. Did he punch you? Does Du Kyung also know how to punch people? He didn't realize that his gentle nephew knew how to hit people. At this time, Du Kyung and the secretary were going to look at the machinery, then they went to see the repair work. They are very satisfied with the environment here. On this side, Jian received a text message from Du Kyung informing him that he would come to pick up her. Then the two got on the train and prepared to go see a movie. When Jian entered the train, she was immediately pulled closer to the door by Du Kyung. The couples all stood in this position. Jian felt a bit embarrassed. It can be seen that Du Kyung has learned a lot about dating. Not only that, but he also followed others and put his hand on the handlebar. Not long after, the two of them reached the movie theater. He followed everybody, holding popcorn and giving it to his girlfriend. The popcorn is almost gone. He poured it into his hand and gave it to her. Jian was still a little embarrassed. She slowly put a piece of sausage into her mouth, unable to hide her happiness. Then he took another piece, and after a while only the last piece remained. Jian was so absorbed in watching the movie that she didn't know the popcorn was gone. As she continued to grab the popcorn, Jian also felt the wonderful feeling of love. The two held hands tightly, and after watching the movie, they went out to eat together. Since it was their first date, Jian was SGE and used chopsticks to fold up the chicken feet to take small bites. Du Kyung felt something was wrong. He turned to look at the way people were eating and realized that Jian was SGE. He immediately said that no one eats chicken feet like that. He lifted the chicken leg up and put it into his mouth. After finishing eating, he held Jian's hand and took her home. Then asked what they will do tomorrow. Jian SGE bowed her head. Thinking she still hadn't thought of what she wanted to do together, he prepared to say her plans. I want to go to the movies with you, walk, see exhibitions and museums. Let's eat noodles together, even if you go to bars, cafes, and even amusement parks. After hearing this, Du Kyung burst out laughing and the two agreed to meet tomorrow, but their hands were still tightly clenched and refused to let go. The next day, Du Kyung started busy with work and came to pick Jian up at night. At this time, Jian was focusing on wood carving and did not notice someone carrying a bouquet of flowers. Looking at Jian, Du Kyung's calm expression with indulgent eyes. Just like that, an hour passed. Jian finally finished carving. Just seeing it now? Jian said he walked without making a sound like a ghost. Du Kyung walked over and gave Jian the bouquet of flowers in his hand. Jian happily received the bouquet of flowers and then the two of them made a statue together. The character being engraved is Jian's father. The two of them went to the ski field again and at this moment they were really happy. After having fun, Jian drove Du Kyung home. She knew he was tired all day and wanted him to rest for a while. When he arrived in front of the house and was about to get out of the car, he discovered that Du Kyung was sleeping wrong. Jian didn't have the heart to wake him up, so she slept with him in the car. At this moment, the blinding light suddenly woke up the two people. Mrs. No stepped down from the car, saw Du Kyung's mother and immediately changed her expression. The two quickly got out of the car. Mrs. No walked up to their side, Jian frightened. She asked Jian what stage they were at. Du Kyung was just about to speak when his mother interrupted him. She wants to be Jian's answer. We plan to meet them for a week. Even though she was surprised, this time she didn't make things difficult for Jian anymore. Du Kyung knew that his mother was coming to find him, so he asked Jian to go home first. After Jian left, Du Kyung took his mother to a small restaurant across the street. Mrs. No hopes her son can return to work at the corporation. After talking for a while, Du Kyung once again expressed that he did not want to return home. He doesn't want to live under his grandfather's orders. Not long after, Jian received a call from Du Kyung. After telling her he was safe, he yawned. Can he still yawn in this situation? Is yawning also transmitted through love? You should get married. Jian and Du Kyung stunned. A person who secretly opposed these two people being together agreed to let them get married. She also asked Jian to drop some water for her. Jian stood up to pick up the kettle, but due to the tension of the tycoon and his wife's fear, her hands kept moving. Du Kyung saw her and quickly took the kettle in her hand. After pouring the water, Mrs. No immediately stated the conditions for the two to get married. Afterwards, Jian gave him the credit for the thousands of packages they used. She immediately pointed out the weakness and then the two discussed business policy together. Dookyung looked at Jian's working figure and smiled. If I go abroad, you must return to the company, okay? Remembering what his mother said when Jian returned from studying abroad for 3 years, they would get married. He immediately felt that this could be a plot to test his guess. He went alone to his parents' house and spoke his mind. I think your goal is to want me and Jian to be apart for 3 years. 3 years is enough time for mother and grandfather to find a partner for their child to marry and have children. The man was still blinded by his wife. He was strictest. He must not talk to his mother like that. Dookyung said if mom really meant it, let him and Jian register their marriage first and then go abroad. Mrs. No immediately became speechless. Seeing that, Mr. Choi turned to ask his wife WGE. She did not agree. Mrs. No came up with a pile of excuses to reject. So this is a conspiracy. Dookyung left angrily. At this moment, Mr. Choi only just realized that his wife had deceived him. So the next day when he went to work, Mr. Choi submitted his resignation letter and despite his wife's objections, he still decided to leave. She felt everyone was turning their backs on her, then got angry and tore up her husband's resignation letter. The story about Dookyung leaving home quickly spread throughout the company. President No, after reading the news, had high blood pressure. He immediately called his son to prepare to blame him for not knowing how to teach him. Where are you running to? Come back here now. I've already resigned. Please don't call me anymore. Goodbye. Chairman No was furious. To cover up, he promoted his subordinate Dookyung to the position of CEO. Everyone who received the news immediately thought this was a plot to compete for special rights by Mr. Choi and his wife. On this side, Dookyung's company also officially went into operation. Everyone who heard the news came to congratulate him. While preparing to celebrate, Dookyung suddenly received a text message from his grandfather accepting his position. This made him feel very surprised. Right now everyone is eating happily together. Suddenly, Jian discovered that because Dookyung was standing outside thoughtfully, Mrs. No also came to see her father. She thanked him for promoting her son. Chairman No said this is the last chance. If refused, he would discard Dookyung. Mrs. No said that Dookyung will definitely come back. In the evening, he received a text message from Dookyung. He thought that he had agreed to come back. But when he opened the message, inside was a photo of his company, with a message saying he would never return to work at the corporation. This action of his was like a shortcut in his grandfather's face. Dookyung, this bastard. President, are you okay? When Dookyung was about to take Jian home, he suddenly received a phone call from the Jemadar. Said my grandfather had to go to the emergency room after reading your message. Dookyung was extremely worried and suddenly dropped the key in his hand. Then he asked Jisoo to help him take Jian home. Then drove alone to the hospital. At this time, the aunt were still constantly criticizing Mr. Choi and Dookyung for not calling them for such an important matter. When Dookyung came over, she started blaming him. At this time the doctor came out of the operating room. The sad story is that Chairman No is not dead yet, just temporarily falling into a coma. Hearing this news, everyone was worried. After everyone left, Dookyung remembered the words he said to him in anger. I will not return to this house. This made him feel extremely tormented. After that, he went home to change clothes and collect his luggage, ignoring everyone's objections and deciding to return to the company. He went to his uncle's office to ask him he was still sitting in the position of general manager, making he not know how to answer. Dookyung announces that he will take over tomorrow, hoping his uncle will move out before then. Then he went to the marketing department and everyone was surprised by his appearance. Dookyung asks everyone to quickly report the company's recent situation. On this side, Jisoo told Jian that Dookyung had returned home, but Jian's attitude was very calm, because she knew that when her grandfather got better, Dookyung would definitely return. The next day, Chairman No finally woke up. Knowing that Dookyung had returned to work at the company, he felt that this illness was not a waste. At this time, Mr. Choi returned to his hometown. Paying respects to his parents, he felt sorry for them. Since entering the tycoon family, he has never returned home to visit his parents. He promised to visit his parents every year from now on. At this point, everyone knew that their family had lost their daughter. Dookyung and his mother guessed that someone was compressing rocks and hiding their hands, but the most suspicious person right now is the couple of aunt. So Dookyung went to Uncle Lee's office to spy on them to see if they were the people behind it. Then he opened the article for the other person to see. Dookyung wanted to use Uncle Lee's expression to determine whether they were the culprits, but Uncle Lee's expression remained unchanged as Dookyung began to doubt his judgment. On this side, social networks are still buzzing about the story of the tycoon's daughter going missing. Even rumors circulated that Mr. Seo had kidnapped Eun-soo. Chairman No relied on his extensive connections to resolve the situation smoothly, but the secretary said that after deleting this post, another post was posted, but the content of the news was directed towards Mrs. No, saying that it was because she caused resentment that she lost her daughter. Hearing this, Mrs. No was immediately confused and scared. Chairman No to a recurrence of heart disease. After calming down, he asked the housekeeper to continue reading. To make this story more convincing, the poster also provided a lot of evidence. After hearing this, Mrs. No collapsed. At this time, because Dookyung also read the news, he immediately called his mother to confirm. She explained it was all a lie then quickly turned off the phone. On this side, Jisoo also saw the news. Said she did something very girly on the way to meet someone. WGE, do I have cancer? WGE, can I die? Earlier when he went to the hospital to ask for a cancer certificate to submit to the insurance company, the doctor informed him that he did not have cancer, but he was just imagining it. This surprised him a bit. He confirmed that the hospital did not guess wrong. Doctors hope he can receive psychological treatment. How did you expect yourself to get cancer? Looking at the insurance bill in my hand, I thought to myself that if I don't die, my daughter won't receive the insurance money. When he returned home disappointed, the president sent someone to stop him. He had no choice but to follow them to the hospital. President No called him this time, because he wanted him to admit that he was the one who gave the child to the thieves that year. That way we can stop the media from continuing to investigate. At the same time, he promised not to let his children suffer. When the world wants to turn me into a criminal and steal, how can I accept it? If he admits it, his children will forever be known as the children of criminals who will never stop being human. The chairman continued to threaten him that if he did not comply, his children would have to live in misery for the rest of their lives, especially Jian. Hearing about his children, the star immediately hesitated for a long time and finally agreed to the other party's unreasonable request, requesting not to reveal his identity. But the chairman did not agree that if he did not reveal his identity, it would not be convincing. Being forced to the end, he could only kneel down and beg. I pray that my children cannot bear the name of criminal children. At this moment, Mr. Choi suddenly appeared. Without saying a word, he walked straight to his side. Please stand up, I will handle this case. At this moment, the president No showed a satisfied expression. At the company, Mr. Lee thought the photo of Jian and Jisoo was posted by his wife, but found out that it wasn't her, so who was behind this? On this side, Do-kyung rushed to his father's office. Ask him if 25 years ago his mother lost her love as reported in the press. Dad admitted it was true. After hearing his father's story, he only then realized that his parents' marriage had issues from the beginning. At this time, another article was posted about Jian impersonating a girl in this family. Reading the news, Do-kyung was extremely angry. On this side, Jian also read the article and she was scared and didn't know what to do. Because Do-kyung was worried about Jian, he called to ask her and Jisoo to hide for a while. Then wait 20 minutes for them at the church gate. Because Jisoo wanted Do-kyung and Jian to have more time together, she asked Ji-hook to take her there first. At this time, Jian also dressed discreetly to the meeting point, making Do-kyung almost not recognize her. After putting Jian in the car, they quickly arrived at Mr. Seo's mountain house. Asked Jian and Jisoo to stay here for a while and then leave them a car. Then he drove back to the city. At night, when the two sisters went to bed, they only knew that their father's scent remained to cover up the panic in their hearts. Over here, Mrs. Seo is still drowning in anger, blaming herself for swapping the two of them, which is WGE this facility happened. At this time, Mr. Seo returned home and saw his wife crying, so he immediately went to comfort her. If anything happens, we will shoulder it together because we are from the same family. After speaking, he gently hugged his wife. The next day, as soon as the tycoon family arrived at the company, they were stopped by a group of journalists. They could only pretend not to see anything. Over here, former colleagues are also discussing. In the future, they will definitely not have the face to continue living without knowing that the fake girl they are talking about is their old colleague Jian. When Do-kyung returned to the company, he suddenly received a notification letter from the board of directors. There was information that my grandfather had been fired from his position. Had my grandfather been fired from his position? Do you dare to believe that this man kneeling on the ground is the real Sherlock Holmes? In order to help Chairman Choi's family neutralize the family's plot and save his daughter from the spiral of power struggle, he deviated from everything that had happened recently. After the final analysis, an anomaly was discovered. He went to his daughter's room, hoping to find some information about this journalist. Feeling that Han was definitely related to the incident, he wrote down the other person's license plate number. It wasn't even dawn before Han's workplace arrived. Not long after, the final target appeared. Mr. Seo quickly turned on his phone and compared it with the photo online to determine that this was the suspect. He immediately went to Han's car to write down the phone number, then called his brother, not forgetting to tell the other person to dress politely. Then gave his friend a card he had printed before. After completing the preparation work, Mr. Seo called the journalist, said he dares to reveal information about his daughter in the newspapers without permission. This is a criminal act. At the same time, he told Han to come to the newspaper office within 10 minutes. Otherwise, he would report to the police. The journalist heard that the other person was about to call the police and was scared and didn't know what to do, so he could only go to the parking lot to prepare to leave. At this time, Mr. Seo's friend saw that the distance between the two cars was getting closer and closer, so he got in the car, started the engine, and crashed straight into his car. A moment later the journalist rushed over, worried that he had had an accident. He pretended to apologize and said he mistakenly pressed the brake pedal. He took out his business card and handed it to the journalist. He said he could take him his car. The journalist also gave his business card to him. After finishing his work, the journalist hurriedly ran to the location he had specified. On the way, he called to inform Ji-hee, but she wanted this story to make a big deal out of it. Unexpectedly, their conversation was recorded. Over here, Mr. Seo took the journalist's dash cam. He handed back the memory card and played the recording for Mr. Choi to listen to. Inside is a conversation between the journalist and his sister-in-law, Ji-hee. With this conversation, the problem will be resolved quickly. Chairman Choi couldn't help but wonder how he could get this important evidence. I remember that Mr. Until he walked out of the gate, he still couldn't believe his eyes. He remembered that Mr. Seo had also asked for the journalist's phone number. Mr. Choi greatly admires Mr. Seo. He didn't expect Mr. Seo to be such an easygoing person. President Choi quickly played the recording. He was indignant and ran to find his wife to ask WG she did that. That news was actually published through my consent, but it was embellished to see things going too far. At the same time, it was said that Du Kyung is a member of ETS Group. If he is destroyed, it will be difficult for the corporation to develop, so they are not allowed to touch Du Kyung. But Ji-hee believes that only when they get rid of Du Kyung can they strengthen their position. But the husband only wants the corporation to grow stronger and bigger, instead of destroying the corporation's founder. Then he asked his wife to quickly collect all the reports. On the other hand, Mr. Seo was surfing the internet for new news about his daughter, because social networks are so scary that they will be a knife or a blade that will destroy his daughter's life. He continuously scrolled through the news until the message no longer existed on the screen. Then he called their daughter who was hiding in the mountains. When they heard the news, they were extremely happy. After that, the driver prepared to return. At this time, Du Kyung also called to inform Jian. Everything is her father's credit. This moment is so warm. Mr. Seo is waiting for Jian to return. When he sees her coming back, he immediately opens his arms. When they got home, the whole family gathered around the tray filled with happiness. Jian told everyone about his father's work as if he had seen it with her own eyes. The whole family talked and laughed happily, but they did not know that happy times were always short-lived. Just 1 month later, Mr. Seo will disappear from this world forever. On this side, Mr. No, after being fucked by his daughter, learned that the board of directors wanted to abolish his position as chairman. To prove his power, he attended the voting meeting. More than half of the people stood up to agree to dismiss Mr. No. And so, Chairman No was stripped of his position as chairman. Not only that, his daughter also blankly announced in front of everyone that he was abolished as president. Chairman No was so angry that he fainted. When Mr. Choi and Du Kyung were about to take him to the hospital, a person on the board of directors spoke up and said, "If you leave the meeting now, it means giving up your right to vote. There is no other way." They were just asking their bodyguards to take Mr. No to the hospital. But the voting results this time were still the same. More than half of the people present agreed to abolish it. Just like that, Mr. Choi and his wife were also relieved of their positions. Here, Jian's family eats together. At this time, Ji-hook suddenly received a text message from Kang-ji, learning of a tragedy in Du Kyung's family. Jian also read the news online about Mr. and Mrs. Choi's excision, but they still have a chance to turn the situation around, which is the shareholders' meeting held 2 days later. Jian was very worried about Du Kyung and pretended to stand up to go to the bathroom. Then he called Du Kyung, and at this time Du Kyung also needed their help. The company has many small shareholders, but the list of small shareholders is as big as a mountain. They are just asking everyone for help. Each person is in charge of a small department above the other and then contacts the shareholders to enlist their support. On this side, Du Kyung also did not have free time. He proactively sought to meet with major shareholders. President Choi also contacted everywhere for help. There was finally some harvest. Chairman Choi had the support of 2 major shareholders. Adding the shares of the 3 of them together, it surpassed Ji-hee's total shares. At this time, Jian received a call from Du Kyung. They announced that they were sure of victory in their hands, telling her not to contact the small shareholders anymore. When Jian heard the news, he was extremely happy. Mr. Seo, standing outside, heard it and quickly ran over to ask Jian how things were going. She told her father that Du Kyung's shares now surpassed his opponents, but Mr. Seo doesn't think so. Things are not as simple as they seem. That day has come. Many journalists have arrived. They all wanted to know if Du Kyung's family could escape this heavy burden. Chairman Choi asked Du Kyung to welcome the shareholders. As soon as he stood up, he discovered a major shareholder walking towards him. But she walked past without even glancing at them. The sudden action surprised them. But Mr. Choi still believes that the remaining shareholder will stand by them. At this time the remaining shareholder appeared. He walked towards President Choi, bowed his head and immediately fell away. This unexpected action made them unable to react in time. Mr. Choi's face turned gray. Friends are sure that Du Kyung's family will fail miserably. Jian gives her father Du Kyung's phone number. At this time, the shareholders' meeting officially begins. As expected, everyone stood up and voted to abolish Mr. Choi and his wife's position. The chairman of the Congress also announced the abolition of the couple's positions from today. Mrs. No was so angry that she fainted. At this time, Du Kyung suddenly received a message from Mr. Seo. When the Congress announced that Ji-hee would become the group's president, Du Kyung suddenly stood up and said he would run for the position of president. Ji-hee's family is very surprised. The whole assembly is also surprised because Du Kyung has no support whatsoever. When he recommended me for the position of president of ETS Group, everyone couldn't believe their eyes. No one supported him and dared to say these words. It's no different than smearing it all over your face. Du Kyung stood in front of the major shareholders and explained that leaving home was just a challenge set by his grandfather. Now that he has overcome the challenge, his grandfather gave him the mission to become president of the group. After speaking, he immediately showed photos of himself starting a business. As soon as the photo was shown, everyone started to stand still. Some even started to believe what he said. But he still hasn't convinced enough. So he took out evidence of her illegal stock trading, and everyone turned their eyes to her. He continued to play the recording of the illegal share buying and selling process in front of the shareholders. The hall immediately stirred up. Ji-hee quickly stood up and explained that she only buys shares outside the group. This statement proved the authenticity of the incident. The husband could only shake his head in frustration at this wife. So they conducted a re-vote, which means that the position of president will definitely be Do-kyung. Everyone stood up and applauded, and just like that, Do-kyung successfully became the group's president. In the elevator, Mrs. No said, "How can he do that?" Do-kyung said he was told by Ji-eun's father. Through investigation, he learned that the shares of these people were all controlled by Ji-hee. Seo took advantage of his business sense and pretended to be Ji-hee's person to call them. Then he recorded it as evidence. So, Mr. Seo helped Do-kyung turn defeat into victory. Chairman No found out. Not only did he not thank them, but he also said it was something they should do. Even the butler had to look down on them. Then he told Do-kyung to restore his parents' positions the next day. 3 months later, he returned the position of chairman of the corporation to him. This time, faced with his arrangement, Do-kyung did not have any response. On this side, Ji-eun knew about his father secretly helping Do-kyung's family. She remembered what her father had told her in the past, that if she and Do-kyung lived in the future, they would both have equal status, so she made her own decision. Over here, Mr. Seo is alone on the mountain. He silently endured the torment of illness. He is sitting dividing his assets after his death. He divided the money into 5 parts, 1 part for his wife, 1 part for daughters, and the remaining money was used for his own funeral. It turned out that not long before he had returned to the hospital for tests, the doctor informed him that he had terminal cancer. The result of the previous prediction was the hospital's mistake, and received bad news from the doctor. Mr. Seo was strangely calm because he had long guessed that he had cancer. Every day he continuously vomited along with prolonged abdominal pain, and even coughed up blood, symptoms identical to his mother's that year. He asked the doctor how much longer he had left, and the doctor said he had less than a month left. He was disappointed as he walked on the main road, feeling that God was trolling him. When he was ready to die, he was informed that he did not have the disease. Right now, it's very difficult to have the motivation to continue living and knowing that I only have less than a month to live. Human life is impermanent. Life and death are unpredictable. Today we see it, tomorrow it is gone. No one can predict tomorrow. In the evening, when he returned home, he gave Ji-eun 200 million won, hoping she could fulfill her dream of studying abroad. Ji-eun was surprised why his father had so much money. He lied that this was the money he and his business partner earned. Ji-eun thought he already knew that he was not have a cancer, but she did not expect that this was money that her father had exchanged in exchange for a living silver. The next day, the friend who had an appointment with him said that Ji-eun had asked about his money. Even though he didn't know how to lie, he still tried to help him hide it. Mr. Seo thanked his friend for doing a great job. At this time, the other person also noticed that Mr. Seo's face was pale, so he asked if he had received false insurance money and given it to Ji-eun. But Mr. Seo said, "I had to live for the moment and take the opportunity to take a photo." The next day, he found Ji-eun again and gave her a ticket to study abroad, departing a week later. The rush of time surprised her. Even though she agreed with her father to study abroad, she didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Mr. Seo called and gave a series of reasons saying that studying abroad was his lifelong dream for Ji-eun. Under his father's orders, Ji-eun only bowed his head and listened. After they went out to watch his daughter's slowly disappearing shadow, he knew he didn't have much time left. So he forced Ji-eun to leave quickly, not wanting to affect her future. That night he ran out of the house in pain and began to vomit. Mrs. Seo opened the inner door and saw her husband like that, so she quickly ran out to check. Seeing her husband vomit feces, she immediately panicked, feeling that his symptoms were identical to those of her mother-in-law who had cancer that year. Over here, Ji-ho suddenly saw his father's phone ringing. He suddenly took the phone out to look for him. He witnessed it all. Frightened, he ran up to ask. And Ji-8 also saw it. He hurriedly ran up. Mr. Seo ran into the room in pain. At this moment, he was in pain and could no longer stand. He could only crawl inside. He quickly took a bottle of painkillers from his pocket, rubbed his shoe, poured the medicine into his hand, then swallowed. Over here, Ji-eun didn't let her father realize that she knew he was sick, so she stayed out alone until late at night. At this time, her brother suddenly sent a text message asking her not to be too heartbroken and wait until tomorrow to go to the hospital to confirm again. Ji-eun asked the doctor if they hadn't guessed wrong a month ago, would her father have been able to undergo surgical treatment? The doctor said her father had chronic cancer, so it was not convenient to come to a conclusion. Ji-tae asked if he could have surgery soon. The doctor shook his head and said the cancer had metastasized, even if surgery or chemotherapy were not effective. On this side, Miss Seo has also quit her job and feels that she is the one who should die. He said his wife must not die because she is currently the only guardian of their children. At the same time, comforted his wife that thinking back, her mistake at that time was not too terrible. Hasn't Ji-eun found her path now? At this time, Ji-eun was sitting in the park. She thought a lot and felt that she should happily go with her father to the end of the journey, so she returned home as if nothing had happened. Mr. Seo thought she still didn't know about her illness, so he asked her if she had completed the procedures to go abroad. Ji-eun said she would temporarily not go abroad to study anymore but wanted to stay by her father's side. Then, admitting that she knew everything, if she couldn't be with her father in the last days of his life, she wouldn't be able to forgive herself for the rest of her life. After hearing this, Mr. Seo became angry and did not want to make his daughter suffer anymore. Jian said she would definitely study abroad but couldn't go right now. Jian decided that he could only agree to let her temporarily stop studying abroad. On this side, Mrs. Seo has also resigned from her job. Hearing her father's vomiting, Jian felt very heartbroken. Mrs. Seo told her to cheer up, otherwise, her father would be very sad too. At this time, Mr. Seo also came out of the bathroom, lying that he didn't understand why he kept bothering to go to the bathroom. Then asking Mrs. Seo why she came home so early, Mrs. Seo said she wanted to go back to her hometown with her husband and she couldn't let him go alone. Then he told Jian at home to take good care of her sister-in-law. Jian also wanted to follow, but her father refused. She held back tears and walked to her parents to the car. She waved goodbye to her father. She still kept a smile on her lips. Until the car went far away. Jian couldn't contain her emotions any longer. But there was no longer any hope for her father. Jian went to work like a lost soul. Seeing that Dookyung had been waiting for him for a long time, Dookyung felt a bit shy. He originally intended to look at her for a moment and then leave, but he didn't expect to be caught by her. Suddenly he saw Jian crying, so he ran over to ask. At this point, Jian couldn't stand it anymore. Jian leaned her head on Dookyung's shoulder and burst into tears. Only when standing in front of her brother can he take off his disguise and become a pitiful girl who loves tales. Not long after, Dookyung came to see his parents. Dookyung asked his father if he should listen to him and reinstate them to their positions. Mrs. No immediately said yes. Mr. Choi said he had resigned. Dookyung has also accepted his father's resignation, so he has no intention of restoring his mother's position. Mom asked him why. Dookyung said this is a group of shareholders who have agreed. The next day, his uncle came to find him and submitted his resignation letter, but unexpectedly, Dookyung rejected his resignation letter. The uncle couldn't help but be surprised. Dookyung knows clearly that he did all of this for the company. Even though the way of doing things is not correct, they all want the company to develop better. In the end, the two started making trouble. After hearing the news, Chairman No was extremely happy. He forced Dookyung to return the chairman position to him. Dookyung said a lot of things, but the bottom line is still based on the porridge and my strength. Why should I return it to him? Grandfather was angry and couldn't do anything. After Dookyung left, he thought Dookyung was angry so he did that. So he asked the butler to call Jian to come to the hospital to see him because he thought that only Jian could calm Dookyung's anger and give him back his position as president. When Jian arrived at the hospital, he thought this time she would be scolded by Mr. No again. Seeing that Jian looked scared, he immediately said he called her to apologize. Jian did not understand. Mr. No thought Jian knew about him hitting Mr. Seo, so he confessed everything. But Jian didn't know at all. She was very angry when she heard about it. She didn't pay attention to Mr. No's words and turned around to leave. On this side, Mrs. Seo was next to her husband and lived with him for the rest of his time. Mrs. Seo's children are also seeking ways to treat cancer. The sister-in-law saw the two brothers discussing, along with the fact that their parents hadn't come home for a long time. She also suspected that something had happened. Jian ended up telling her sister-in-law everything. The elder sister-in-law felt guilty. She didn't want her parents-in-law to do that because of her. At this time, Jisoo came to visit. Waiting for his sister-in-law to leave, Jian told her everything. After hearing this, Jisoo burst into tears, feeling that everything was not true. The next day, Jitae and his wife went up the mountain to meet their father. Mr. Seo could not help but be surprised by the appearance of his daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law said she was there when her parents returned, then she asked her husband to quickly go inside and pack up his things. But when Mr. Seo stopped her, she told her father-in-law that if he stayed here, she and her grandson would always feel worried and insecure. She also didn't want to take away his short time with his family. Finally, Mr. Seo also agreed to return home. The next day, Mrs. Seo prepared a lavish meal, while Mr. Seo cleaned up as usual. Jian happily ran out to call his to come eat. After breakfast, the eldest brother and sister-in-law went to work together. A happy life like never before tragedy. This is a fierce battle. The butler came to tell Mrs. No that he wanted to take a few days off to attend his father's funeral. No didn't say anything but directly pulled out 20 million won from her pocket and threw it on the board. Then he turned around and left. This action was like a knife piercing the butler's heart. She walked over and picked up the money on the table, looked at the 20 million won in her hand, and thought to herself that after all, she had worked for this family for 30 years. But in the end, I only received this cold treatment. Today, after returning from taking care of her father's funeral, Mrs. No turned around and was startled in surprise. Today's butler is dressed more casually than her. She placed the resignation letter on the table, then sat on the sofa and looked at Mrs. No with an annoyed expression. So Mrs. No immediately said this was not a place where a servant could sit. The butler asked the other person to review the resignation letter on the table. She said her father had passed away, so she didn't need to stay here to work anymore. Mrs. No said she would increase his salary, but the butler refused. Mrs. No was extremely surprised by this action. The butler blamed Mrs. No's family for never treating her like a human being. At this time, the butler also told the truth about 25 years ago. That year, she received an order from Chairman No to follow her and see with her own eyes Insu being taken away. She wanted to get out of the car to stop him, but she remembered how the woman often scolded her for no reason. In the end, she decided to fulfill her role and not worry about money anymore. Listening and following orders is her job. It was thought that Mrs. No would save Insu, but she didn't do that at all. Mrs. No was furious. The butler remained very complacent. The two of them rushed into fighting. Exhausted, they both sat down on the ground. The butler sat down with a satisfied look on her face. Mrs. No wished to question why she didn't tell her then. The butler said, "At that moment, you changed my destiny, leaving me unmarried till now." After speaking, the butler stood up, holding the cheek that was beaten. "If you had treated me better, Unsu wouldn't have been lost." Mrs. No was about to continue fighting. "No, Myung-hee. Do you know what your husband did while you were unconscious?" It turns out Mr. Choi has always been by Mrs. No's side. He said that even if he couldn't find his daughter to return, he wouldn't blame her. He only hoped that his wife could wake up safely because he couldn't lose her. This scene was hidden by the butler standing outside. She proudly adjusted her hair and turned around to speak to Mrs. No. "Wish you luck, No Myung-hee." Afterward, the butler returned 20 million won, then left, leaving Mrs. No alone. A while later, she gathered herself and walked to the mirror to look at herself. She cried in the room for a long time. Finally, she had an awakening. Her cries echoed throughout the office unstoppably. After being beaten by the housekeeper in a battle of conscience, she finally awakened. The next morning, she immediately brought gifts to thank Mr. and Mrs. Seo's family. Coincidentally, I did not see the close appearance of sisters Jian and Jisoo. Also, the fact that her sister and she always considered each other as enemies made her feel very embarrassed. At this time, Jian and her sister saw Mrs. No. They were scared as if they had just seen death. Jian still had many unresolved questions, so she left first. Mrs. No told Jisoo that she came to thank Mrs. Seo's family. Jisoo said everyone had already gone to the supermarket. Surprisingly, she wanted to stay so everyone could return. When they walked back home hand in hand, he saw Mrs. No getting out of the car. Both were surprised by her presence. Then they went into the house to sit and talk. Mrs. Seo was still nervous when facing Mrs. No. Mrs. No said she came here to express her gratitude. She also apologized for what happened in the past. When she returned, Mrs. No saw her father sitting in the living room, so she sat down to inquire about him. Chairman No blamed Do-kyung for forcing him to leave the hospital, but Mrs. No remained silent. Chairman No then asked what happened to the butler. After hearing his daughter's story, he was extremely angry and said he would teach that woman a lesson, but Mrs. No also thought clearly and did not want to do it anymore. But Chairman No didn't think so. After speaking, she stood up and went to her room, leaving her angry father to call the butler. "Mr. No, don't forget, I have evidence of your crime in my hands." The butler turned off the phone and began her journey. Mrs. No returned to the room and saw Mr. Choi had finished packing up. Suddenly, she noticed a prescription in the trash bin. At this moment, she realized that Mr. Choi was suffering from depression. As he walked in, she hastily asked why he was like this. He retrieved the prescription, stating that they were on the verge of divorce, so there was no need to ask. Then he prepared to leave, despite Mrs. No's attempts to hold him back. Hearing Mrs. No's sincere apology, he stopped in his tracks. In fact, he still cared deeply for his wife. On this side, Mrs. Seo has finished cooking. The whole family sat together. How happy this moment is. Under the advice of his family, Mr. Seo finally agreed to go to the hospital for treatment. After arriving at the hospital, the whole family could not bear to leave him. Finally, under their father's urging, they returned to work. On the way back, no one said anything. They all knew that the hospital couldn't prolong the father's life. All the doctors could do was help him relieve some of the pain and suffering of illness during the last period of his life. When Do-kyung called Mr. Seo, a nurse answered the phone. Only then did he know Mr. Seo's condition. Upon receiving the news, he rushed to the hospital. After entering the hospital room and seeing him, Mr. Seo struggled to look out the window. He now knew why Jian cried so pitifully that day. Do-kyung slowly walked up and knelt before Mr. Seo. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Mr. Seo hurriedly ran up to help Do-kyung up. Do-kyung told Mr. Seo about story with Jian. Do-kyung blamed himself for not thinking about Jian. Though not entirely satisfied, Mr. Seo saw that Do-kyung truly loved Jian. He said that Jian must really like Do-kyung to act that way. He hoped that Do-kyung would take care of Jian after he passed away. He hoped Do-kyung could fulfill that wish. Do-kyung is also struggling because Jian is preparing to go abroad. Let Jian see her sincerity. Mr. Seo said that time is the best way to heal wounds. He also said Do-kyung shouldn't cry like an irresponsible man. Hearing this, Do-kyung suddenly burst out laughing. Mr. Seo's advice helped him regain his direction. In the evening he was again tormented by pain. Even though he knows that his remaining time is not much, he lives every day very optimistically, confidently show off his piano playing skills to the patients here. Even with the companionship of his family, he was able to name his soon-to-be-born grandson Seo Seo Jin. The whole family laughed and talked happily at the hospital bed. Jisoo asked Mrs. No for permission to return to her foster parents' home. Mrs. No didn't object at all. She even suggested they switch to a bigger house. Jisoo shook her head and said there was no need because her sister-in-law and brother were about to move out and her father was about to leave. Saying this, she couldn't help but burst into tears, making her parents confused. Jisoo told them about Mr. Seo's cancer. The two were extremely surprised and he immediately contacted the best hospital. Over here, Jisoo and Jitae are talking about the things recorded in their father's diary. At this moment, Jitae and everyone smiled and waved at him. Jiho posted a poster with the word Seo Taesu's concert and also invited friends to join. Mr. Seo finally responded. Mrs. Seo also encouraged her husband to perform. Mr. Seo finally didn't refuse. Facing so many people like that, he also felt a little shy. Jian looked at his father and smiled. In the end, he did play for everyone to listen. Everyone listened attentively. Mr. Seo was passionate about playing the guitar on stage. The performance ended, and he had fulfilled his final wish. Do-kyung stood and watched from afar, then quietly left. Afterwards, they took a photo together. Jian let her father rest under the tree. Mr. Seo reached out to touch the sunlight. Everything is beautiful. Thinking back to the time spent with my children suddenly makes me feel happy. The whole family discussed where to take Dad for the next few days. Jian turned around to call her father and found that he didn't respond. She thought he was too tired so he fell asleep. She immediately went to call her father but still did not receive any response. Dad! Jian immediately froze and looked at her father who was sitting motionless in fear. She stood still in silence. Hearing Jian's call, everyone immediately looked back. He ran to his father, repeatedly calling him to wake up, but he could no longer hear anything. Jian bent down, grabbed her father's face and repeatedly screamed for him not to leave. Mrs. Seo trembled and fell down. Dad! Dad! Mr. Seo's life has truly been too miserable and too tiring. More than half of his life is busy because of stress. In another life, everyone hoped he would live happily without suffering much. Mr. Seo's sudden passing left everyone completely distraught. Jisoo next to her mother, Jian sat leaning against the wall like a lost soul. His two sons also silently shed tears. Jitae told Jiho to take mom to rest. Mr. and Mrs. Choi also came to offer incense. Jian saw that they still hadn't resolved the conflict in their hearts with the couple. After she first thanked him, she went out alone. Mrs. No quickly called Do-kyung. Do-kyung said if he went there, Jian wouldn't be happy. After saying that, he hung up the phone. They buried Mr. Seo under a tree. Because Mr. Seo is like a tree, he always sacrifices his illness without needing compensation. They all know that their father's last wish is for the family to always be happy. 1 year later, Jitae was promoted to department head. Mrs. Seo stayed at home to take care of the grandchildren. Jiho also opened a bakery and had a girlfriend. Jisoo and Hyuk are preparing to get married. Mr. Choi became a university professor. Jian still always strives to study. She listens to her father and goes abroad to study. The two people's feelings are growing stronger and Jian is still trying to learn. Today, Jian decides to come back to her homeland. Jisoo and Hyuk go to the airport to pick up Jian. Jian has changed a lot. That's why they didn't recognize Jian. Jisoo drives Jian home. Hyuk was nervous, but luckily they arrived safely. Jian wants to watch the way home here. Everything around has changed a lot. Suddenly the forest girl walked away, and she saw Do-kyung sitting on a shopping cart, eating cake and drinking milk. She didn't understand why he was the president of a big company and why he was here. After returning home, I couldn't help but feel happy when I saw my lovely niece. When GH heard the news that his sister was returning home, he immediately ran home. She would cook a tray of rice and meat to celebrate Jian's return home, but now their family is missing an important person. Returning to the room, Jisoo told her, since Jian went abroad, Do-kyung resigned as chairman and left the position to his uncle. The next day, the whole family visits their father's grave. Jian can't hold back her tears and bursts into tears. At this time, Jian suddenly remembered that she forgot to put the photo she brought on her father's grave. When she arrived first, her father's grave saw another thief of flowers, which made her very curious. At this time, Do-kyung also just left. On the way home, Jian received a call from her best friend asking her to go on a blind date for her, because yesterday, she had made up with her boyfriend and had already made an appointment with the date so she couldn't help but come. Jian was a little confused. At the end, under her own earnest pleading, Jian finally arrived at the meeting point. Her best friend told her to just say her name and the other person would know who it was. When Jian went on a blind date for her best friend, she unexpectedly turned out to be Do-kyung. Do-kyung doesn't seem surprised at all. He sat down in front of her. Jian assumed that he had joined hands with her best friend to trick her, but Do-kyung denied it. She didn't dare that Do-kyung would go on a blind date, but he said he went on a blind date many times every day, but would have thought that today he would be deceived. Jian quickly apologized because her best friend had an urgent matter so she couldn't come. Do-kyung listened and frankly said it was definitely so. Looking at his serious way of speaking, Jian couldn't help but be skeptical. Why are you talking to me so politely? Because this is the first time we meet each other. Jian remembers that she herself said so. Do-kyung gives Jian a business card. Jian explains that what she means is that we go back to being two strangers, not starting over again. Jian doesn't want to fall in love and says she will go abroad the day after tomorrow to continue her studies. Du-kyung says he doesn't mind long-distance relationships, and that made Jian even more certain that he had joined hands with her best friend. Jian ran behind the bookshelf to call her best friend. After hearing this, her best friend was surprised. Only then did Jian confirm that this was truly a coincidence. Even so, she didn't want to fall in love with Du-kyung, and then quickly left. Mrs. No suddenly called to say she wants to meet her. Jian politely declined the invitation. Mrs. No looked at the phone in surprise. Mr. Choi quickly asked what Jian said. She recounted what Jian said. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became, not daring to believe that she had changed so much. After her best friend found out that her date was Du-kyung, she immediately asked her what she felt when she met him again. Jian said that although she was happy, she still felt a little heartbroken. The next day, she went to her brother's bakery and had just talked a few words when Du-kyung walked in. Jian saw him and immediately turned to look at his younger brother with skeptical eyes. Ji-ho quickly explains that Du-kyung is a regular customer of the shop because he often buys cakes for breakfast. He looked at Jian for a hidden meaning, then turned and left. Jian chased after and asked why he had come here. Du-kyung said he left home and started living independently by buying an apartment recently. Hearing this, Jian couldn't help but be surprised. Du-kyung then offered to take her to the park for a tour. Unexpectedly, Jian immediately agreed. After getting off the bus, Du-kyung introduced herself to the secretary. She was Seo Jian had just met at their blind date yesterday. Even though I didn't know what they were doing, I still acted together with them. Jian also pretended to reintroduce herself, and as a joke, the three of them played amnesia together. Du-kyung took her to the museum. Here he spoke his heart out, but in the end Jian still did not accept Du-kyung's love. After leaving the museum alone, Du-kyung said he had Mr. Seo's agree. Hearing that, Jian turned to look at him with skeptical eyes. In fact, her father had previously told Du-kyung that if he wanted to pursue Jian, he had to learn to wait. Jian was very surprised when she found out, knowing that tomorrow she would go abroad, but she refused and said that if they were destined to be together, they should wait until she returned from studying abroad to think about starting again. After speaking, he turned around and left. Jian packed her luggage and prepared to go abroad. She came to the family photo and looked at the photo of her and her father together, remembering what he had said before. If you meet someone you like, don't let yourself regret it. Not long after Jian arrived at the airport, she suddenly stopped. She wanted to see if Du-kyung was coming here or not, but she didn't see any sign of him. This made her feel a little disappointed, not knowing that Du-kyung had already arrived a long time ago. He just didn't want her to see him. After Jian left, he quietly walked out and watched Jian's back fade away. He silently made a decision. Actually, Jian still had something unknown. Seeing Jian heartbroken, he felt the pain too. He was also present at the funeral. It was all arranged by Du-kyung. Jian, sitting on the plane, quietly pulled out a wooden statue from his pocket, and this wooden statue was Du-kyung. Not long after, Jian went abroad. She continues to work part-time to make ends meet. At this time, the boss said that table number 3 had someone ordering. Jian immediately took out a pen and paper to prepare to go there. But she was speechless when she saw a man waving at her in the crowd. And this person is none other than Du-kyung. Jian stood still for a long time, then she went to ask him, "Why did you come here?" Du-kyung said he planned to expand his business here and asked Jian, "If so, will you accept love?" Jian looked at the person she loved without saying a word. Then she turned around and continued working. Suddenly she stopped and turned to look at Du-kyung with affectionate eyes. Du-kyung himself smiled. Jian also looked at him and smiled. The movie ends here. A beautiful ending to the difficult love story of Du-kyung and Jian. Lovers will eventually come together. If you're single, let's go eat red beans. Hope you soon find your other half. Remember to subscribe to the channel to watch super good movies.